cracks in it. Have you seen that one?
No.
I recommended that I replace
That
it
sounds
last
disturbing.
time.
Council deliberation on Agenda Bill 18111, Resolution 1461, approving the Salish Expansion Plan Residential and Plan Commercial Industrial Master Plan, PCI 180001, and adopting the Planning Commission's findings of facts, conclusions of law, and recommended conditions of approval. Before we begin the meeting tonight, we'll be going immediately into into a closed session pursuant to RCW 42.30.140, Section 2, and or an executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, Section 1, lowercase I, triple lowercase I. The closed session, executive session is expected to last about 10 or 15 minutes, and we're going to, I think it'd be more efficient if we just all execute upstairs to the conference room real quick.
Says the guy who's already eaten dinner.
Yeah, I know. Take your dinners with you if you want.
Leave the dessert down here for later.
Yeah, but
You gotta share.
To the Salish Lodge expansion is now back in session. Agenda Bill 18111. Jason, you would cue it up.
Got mine too, please.
Jason gave us all the updated matrices in our mailbox. I know what you're
Oh, okay. Is it for everybody, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good evening. Good evening. So, Councilmember Lissay stepped out for a sec.
He went to grab no one grabbed their matrices that you put in the mailboxes, so.
Some people did.
I forgot I had a mailbox here, sorry.
Some people grabbed their
He got
matrix
emailed
days
out.
ago and spent
Yeah.
the weekend with it.
Oh, great.
We can send
It's
smoke
nice to
signals
call
too.
out Catherine like that. Good job, Catherine.
We'll remember that one in the future and just get you guys hard copies immediately instead of having to one of you ask. So I'll launch right into the first one, which is tree retention. It's on the first page. And what we provided for you is a response to the council's discussion. And I just want to focus on the two proposed conditions here. One of them is the more qualitative approach that was suggested. And the second one is a more quantitative approach. And staff feels either of these conditions would address the council's discussion about trees. And then the rest of the answer is concerning what information is in the record about tree retention.
There-
Councilmember Ross?
So the cities, we have a tree management plan that we go by, correct? And we so identify the
Correct.
bad trees, the diseased trees, things like that. And I think that, I like number one, where it just lets them maintain their trees and we know what their plan is. And they have a process to do this.
Okay. I'll just give the council members to review the staff's responses to questions pertaining to trees from the last time we discussed this. And if there's no further questions or concerns, perhaps we could move on. Councilmember Mayhew?
Mayor, I had some questions about open space, but I don't think.
Pull your mic down a little bit.
Oh, sorry. I had some questions about open space, but not trees in particular. Will there be another time to talk about open space?
Tree management versus,
I want to say open space is further down, but let me
Good, okay. In that
I'll double
case-
check before we move on.
Trees. That's what it's. Trees.
Right.
Tree management.
Oh, it's way down, okay.
so they have a tree management plan.
It's here, 17.
Number 17, we've got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, council, so if there's no other questions about the tree issues, then we'll, okay to move on to the next subject, if there's no objection? Good. All right, Jason?
All right, the second one is about parking, and there's a response there.
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry, don't we have to pick which tree management program we want?
I wasn't aware there was a question, Jason.
There was a question, because we
From-
provided two possibilities. One was a more qualitative approach to a tree management plan, and the second one was a tree retention plan, which would more specifically count the trees. The only direction I heard was use the qualitative approach, and I didn't hear an objection.
Okay. So you're going for a condition for a tree management plan.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Now I'm good.
Okay. All right, so if there's no
Okay.
objection, that will be the direction from the council, and
Okay, number 2 is about parking, and so we provide some reference to information in the record about parking. We also, there was an inadvertent oversight. We neglected to identify the 30 parking spaces that are associated with the 30 managed residential units. That meets the parking requirement of 1 space per unit.
Councilmember Ross?
Is staff parking in there as well?
The staff parking is accounted for in the parking ratio for the hotel, and for all the land uses for that matter.
Okay, it's included.
So it's all baked in by the ratio.
Okay.
So was the 30 spaces, Jason, accounted for by the architect or the designers, but it was just missed in a typo, or how was that, or was it just an omission?
It was just an inadvertent oversight by staff. If you look at the diagram that's in the application materials, it actually specifically notes there's X number, 404 parking stalls for the hotel and 30 parking spaces for the managed residential. I just missed that line. And then
Okay, that's what I wanted to get at. So the applicant, in fact, had those 30 spaces in there.
Yes.
You just missed capturing them in the report.
We had the category, but we didn't have the letters 30 next to it.
Okay, that's what I wanted to emphasize, was that it wasn't, the applicant hadn't missed that. We did. Councilmember Mayhew.
So a couple questions. I just don't understand how this matrix answer works. So there's, because we've seen the, like, pancake answers and on top of answers. So on the answer on September 20th of 18, it says that there will be 440 maximum stalls. At least, I think that's what it says.
So the code requirement, as the planning department has calculated, is this project would require, I'll amend the numbers because of the managed residential, 382 stalls minimum. So that's 352 plus 30. So the previously calculated 352 with all that math on the 9/20, the September 20th answer.
Yeah.
So add 30 stalls to that because we inadvertently omitted the managed residential.
So what is the significance? There's a word here, previously it was 440 maximum, and then parentheses, it says 125%.
So the-
Now
so the-
it says 478 maximum,
So the-
125%.
Right.
What-
So the code allows for, so the code contains a minimum parking requirement. That's that's the now 382. It allows a maximum parking of 125% of the minimum.
I see.
So that's the range that parking can be provided. If this project were to propose, say, 600 parking stalls, we would say, no, you can't do that. That exceeds the maximum under the code.
All right, and so then they're proposing, am I correct, 400?
404 for the hotel and 30 for the managed residential. So
434.
434, and the range for this project would be 382 to 478.
Got it. All right. I have another question about parking. Should I
Yeah,
continue?
continue,
Okay. So a little bit farther down, the response from 10-4 of 18, towards the bottom of page 4, second to last paragraph, says the applicant has previously noted that hotel workers would not be allowed to park in the expanded lower parking lot. So I'm not clear how that's going to be effectuated. So could we, for example, require as a part of the approval something like that they don't allow parking, or that they restrict parking to 2 or 4 hours, or is there some mechanism by which we can put a requirement in that would produce this?
It would, so the direct answer to your question is yes, we could. That may not necessarily be the best thing to do because there are, as you've seen elsewhere in the answer, the lower parking, or rather the existing upper lot is subject to an easement between Puget Sound Energy and the Muckleshoot Indian tribe, which we are not party to. And so how they negotiate as private parties isn't, strictly speaking, our business. And it may not be best for us to insert ourselves into that by putting time requirements. Because right now, today, a guest of the Salish Lodge could park in the existing upper or lower lots and walk across the street and check in. And there's nothing to stop that. It also,
So I wonder-
theoretically would put the city in the business of having to enforce a parking time limit, which outside of the 24-hour limit, we don't do.
So we have many parking time limits across the city, which we don't enforce, but we have them nonetheless, right?
Right.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, just not to belabor this, I just wonder if the applicant might be willing to propose some specific action that they would take. They've already said they're not going to allow this. So I wonder if they could just they'd be willing to translate those words into some sort of specific thing they'd be agreeable to, and then we just put that in the condition and put this behind us.
I mean, I think, Jason, you're suggesting they could put a sign, for example, no employee parking in the lower lot, but it's not their lot to put
Well,
the sign in.
I was going to ask the applicant if they wanted to respond to this for a second, if it's acceptable.
Rachel wants to clarify.
Yeah.
Let me explain this. Thank you for the time. We have an agreement with PSE for this parking. First of all, we have an easement for the lower lot. Salish Lodge holds an easement to utilize the lower lot for all hotel needs. The upper lot PSE holds an easement for. That's why we're moving the parking to a lower parking area for their purposes. When we complete that parking lot, we are signing an agreement with PSE. They no longer want the parking lot to be used by any employees of the Salish Lodge, and we have agreed to that. And we have a strict, very strict amount of requirements for that. They will be watching that parking lot, and they have rights to go to management of the Salish Lodge to get those employees moved out, and they actually have the right to revoke their easement from us if we do not comply. So I can guarantee you there will not be employee parking in that lot. Does that help at all? Great, thank you.
So now let me try and simplify my question. Now maybe having heard that, I wonder, would it be burdensome for us to put a condition in that hotel workers won't be allowed to park? Just basically what's written here. I had suggested a moment ago something more specific, but perhaps we put this requirement here.
Right, and that's a legitimate question, and I would just jump in and say, and unless Mr. Danish wants to disagree with me, I don't believe there's anything in the record that contains any of the details about the reciprocal easements that council just heard. So you're probably better off proceeding with your question, Councilmember Mayhew, rather than relying simply on the answer that you
sorry, I'm just
got.
reading from the matrix.
Okay, which is fine.
The matrix says the applicant has previously noted that hotel workers would not be allowed to park in the expanded lower parking lot. So,
Right, but I think what he's saying is we can't, but since what we were just told is outside the record,
yes,
we cannot necessarily be satisfied with what was just said to us. So if you're not comfortable with that, we can't just rely on that. We would need to put a condition into it.
Which is what I
essentially what
understand
she said, but make that a condition of ours, since what she said is outside the record.
got it.
Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So what I'm wondering, though, is based on that, it sounds like the applicant isn't going to object to us asking them to do exactly what they just told us they're already doing. So if we put that as a condition and it doesn't, maybe we could pursue the notion that if the applicant doesn't, finding out if the applicant would object to us putting that in as a condition.
Yes, we can.
Mr. Danish is waving his hand.
Step up.
Thank you, Terry Danish on behalf of the applicant. So just to clarify, and not to contradict the city's attorney, we have made statements in the record with regard to the existence of these easements in front of the Planning Commission. The specifics of them are not, as Mr. Sturbank has indicated, in front of you. And aren't in the record. But there is also reference in the SEPA checklist that was originally submitted to the shared easements between the parties. Right. So all of that, I mean, they're not necessarily adopted by reference, but the fact of their existence is acknowledged. And as Ms. Nathanson pointed out, we're trying to walk a very straight line with PSC on this issue because they have complained to us before about it. We actually worked out kind of an interim arrangement with them for what it's worth. That's not on the record, and I'm not commenting about that for purposes of this discussion, but I'm just trying to say that this is a big point of emphasis for us, and we are not going to drop the ball regardless of any condition that the city might choose to impose. So
my point is that all sounds very encouraging, and so it seems like let's just put this in as a condition and move on.
What does that condition sound like? That's what I'd like to move on if you could just.
I think we would phrase the condition to say employees of the expanded Salish Hotel and Spa shall not park in the expanded lower parking lot.
I think that's already in the condition. Mr. Councilmember Mayhew is looking for some enforcement mechanism that would be required.
Is it in? I'm not sure that there is a condition that.
Yeah, I'm saying this because I didn't think that was a condition. If that's already a condition, then maybe I just need to read that.
Yeah, but if it's not conditioned, then it's not. Obtain permits, that's compliance.
I thought you queued up the question reading that section and saying it says this, but I don't know how that's enforced.
Right.
And that's the difference between a finding of fact and having it be a condition. And so he's looking to see if it's a condition. If it
Right.
is, great, we can move on. If it's not, we need to make it one.
That's my
And then move
point
on.
of view.
Okay,
yes.
so you want to turn a finding of fact into
So what it says is the project shall provide parking this is the Planning Commission findings. This is condition number 21 on page 32. The project shall provide parking in conformance with chapter 17.65 SMC, which is the parking code. And then number 22 says the expanded lower lot shall, to the maximum extent feasible, replace the upper parking lot stalls 1 for 1. And they shall not count toward fulfillment of any parking requirement for the hotel or associated facilities or any residential development. So I would say it's implied but not explicit that that lot is not for the hotel.
So, again, I'm saying let's put in a condition that makes
Yeah.
it explicit.
Yeah, we can do that.
And so just, I don't know what the
So the
appropriate
condition
wording
simply
is.
being that the reconstructed parking lot shall not be used for employee parking for the hotel.
Yeah, and I don't know if the wording is, the hotel shall ensure that, or if we just put, I don't know how these things ought to be worded, but whatever the wording is that would give some recourse to the city to go back and say, wait a minute, you didn't do this.
We can prepare some draft language and bring it.
We'll draft it up.
I don't know if any other council members disagree with me, but I think this is an important point, just because if it's a problem.
I don't think the applicant objects, I'm just trying to find
Okay,
language that
move on.
satisfies
Okay.
Councilmember Mayhew, so. Serious.
Well, no, it's not a personal thing. It's I'm worried about traffic impacts and the impact that we already have a massive impact on that street. We have to post our
Councilmember
police
Mayhew, what I
officers
meant by
there.
that is that the planning commission members were satisfied by the applicant's statement that no parking would be allowed. And if you and a number of residents perhaps would want that in writing, then whatever writing that you and many people as members of this community would want to see that would capture that in the condition. I'm saying just propose language, and I think everybody'd be happy to move on.
Let's not propose,
Attorney.
no, they're gonna
Okay.
do.
Bring it back, Mayor.
Great, so we'll
at the
bring it
next
back.
meeting.
We're good to go.
That's-
Councilmember,
We don't need to
let's
draft
say.
now.
I support that we do add a condition for that, no employee parking in that lot. And I also support the language that is in here regarding the parking management plan to address event parking and other hotel-related parking issues for there. So if the council would take a look at that, and if anybody has any objection to that, I would like to move forward with that being a condition.
I'm sorry, could you state that again?
So-
Lean forward, Matt.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You pull your microphone. We
I
couldn't hear
can't
you
get
very
any
well.
forward without standing on the desk. Gotta do what you gotta do.
That works.
Or if you could just speak up.
Wow, I've never had anybody ask me to speak up.
Just focus on the new condition.
I'm just, right here, it says it in your matrix. It's the last paragraph under council, before council discussion.
This is bottom of page 4 of the matrix.
Bottom of page 4, top of page 5, that there should be that I believe that there should be a parking management plan to address event parking and other hotel-related parking issues as a condition of approval. That's to address, should there be events that will exceed the parking requirements on I assume that includes a special event permit that goes along with that. And I would just like, staff mentions it here, but I would like staff to come back with actual wording that we can then motion in as a condition of approval.
So codify no employee parking and codify the parking management plan.
Yes.
So those are your two marching orders on parking, and I think we're done.
Got it.
Any objections from the applicant? Okay. All right. Any other issues on parking, council? All right, let's move on to if there's no objections, we'll move on to the next subject.
All right, number 3, this is clarifying the project entitlement, specifically the managed residential, and how they could be used. And so there's a response here that clarifies what phase 3 of the hotel development would consist of. It's going to be either 89 hotel rooms or 89 hotel rooms and 30 managed residential units, or 0 hotel rooms and 60 managed residential units. And the applicant has stated previously that their decision on phase 3 is dependent on market conditions when they get around to constructing this phase. And then they've also stated that these managed residential units would be privately owned condominiums, but they would have access to the hotel services.
And I think there was a question from council about what does the applicant mean when they say condominium, and Mr. Danish is here, and so you might just want to get clarification.
Yeah, because I
directly
think there
from
was a series of questions about, is this a hotel room or is it a residential unit? If it's a residential unit, are there affordable housing requirements and other questions that
Yeah.
spill from that,
Well, the
as I
answer-
recall?
And the answer to that part is no, because these are part of the hotel's entitlement and not the residential entitlement.
In terms of numbers of units?
Correct.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So this is the part, I've gone back and read this carefully. And first off, the word condominium isn't in the agreement. There's a term in there that is undefined. I cannot find a definition of it anywhere. The implication is exactly what I just heard, which is that these would somehow be part of the hotel. And what I'm reading here and what I just heard is there'll be privately owned condominiums, which doesn't sound like a hotel at all to me. It sounds like a residential unit, and therefore, I'm sort of wondering, how did we get to the idea that we're basically taking a housing unit and putting it in the hotel and saying it doesn't have to have affordable housing? I don't see how we got to that from the agreement.
So can I speak to that? So I'm looking at section 2.1.3 of the amended restated development agreement from 2016 that says the hotel and associated facilities design may include condominium units as part of the hotel. So use the word condominium, which shall not be included in the residential unit cap set forth in Table 2. And so then Table 2 says 175 single-family or other residential, max affordable housing, 15%, I'm quoting here, 15% of the total residential units excluding condominium units within the hotel, unquote. So
Okay, so that's very
why
helpful,
they're-
yeah.
Right, so that's why they're not treated as residential units for purposes of calculating affordable housing requirements, because the development agreement says that, and it says that they can be included in the hotel and associated facilities, as Mr. Rogers
Yep, no, I
was
follow
saying.
that completely. That's very helpful. But let me ask this. The wording was as part of the hotel. Could you go back to the very beginning of what you read? Condominium units as part of the hotel?
The hotel and associated facilities design, and associated facilities was the nomenclature that the development
I know, I'm
agreement
just trying to
uses.
hear the words.
Right, for the other pieces that are associated with the hotel.
Yeah, could you just read the words like you read it before?
Sure. Hotel and associated facilities design may include condominium units as part of the hotel.
Okay, so that's where I was trying to get, as part of the hotel. So condominium units that are being sold off to individuals, which is what this is saying, doesn't sound like part of the hotel. And so maybe I don't understand what part of the hotel might imply.
But can be.
Physically?
Physically, right? So a condominium, and again, I believe this is what the applicant means, and I'll let Mr. Danish clarify, but I believe they mean condominium in the statutory sense of the term, which is that defines a physical space for a unit inside of a building, and the building itself, the outer walls and common areas, stairways, et cetera, are owned by the association or managed by and then individual persons or corporations or what have you own the, quote, units, the air spaces within the individual walls. And I believe that's what they mean, and how that would be, how they plan to do that here as part of the hotel. It could be managed by the overall hotel, which I believe is what they've indicated their intention is, that would then, allow individuals they can be rented, or the person who owns it can stay there.
So here's what I'm struggling
however
with,
it works.
I'm trying to get clear in my mind the difference between an apartment building, which would largely, probably not identically, but largely meet the criteria you just outlined. Probably some critical difference that I'm not seeing.
Right.
But it would be, I'm trying to get the difference between an apartment building where we would expect affordable housing requirements to attach, and this building, which sounds to me like it's going to look and walk and quack the same way, but so what's the difference? That's what I'm trying to get at. And what, and I get that, well, it's in the agreement, and maybe that's ultimately the answer. I'm just trying to understand of
Right.
how.
That is the ultimate answer is we're treating it this way as part of the hotel because that's what the agreement with the applicant was in, or is, in the development agreement. And the difference between a condominium and an apartment is that a person owns the airspace within each unit, as opposed to an apartment. The tenant doesn't own anything. The tenant has a lease and can be evicted for a
Oh, so I could
variety
use
of
the word
conditions, et cetera.
townhomes, or I could have used any of the words that describe building of that nature. So I just want to make sure that we're clear.
Right, but even a townhome is different typically because the owner owns the structure. Typically in a condominium, the condominium unit owner does not own the physical structure. They own the space within the four walls in a unit. I mean, it's a fractionalization of ownership.
So what I'm trying to get at is the point of how do I recognize, there's this words part of, or with, as part of the hotel, or I'm not getting it, I'm not quoting it right, but I'm just trying to get clear why that's different. And are we sure that we haven't stumbled into something that in the agreement was thought to be part of a hotel, and all of a sudden now it's part of, these are condominiums that are going to be sold, and somehow was it crystal clear? Because that wording isn't clear to me, but maybe it is to a lawyer, that wording was crystal clear, that they just get a buy on the 15%? That was just what we agreed to?
When so far as the language says the affordable housing credits don't apply to them, yeah.
Right.
And it's clear that that was.
Correct, and that was.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to get clarity, if that's what we agreed.
That predates my time at the city, and I think Mr. Hoffman's and others as well. I think that exception from the affordable housing requirement goes back a fair ways in time.
And it was clearly intended that they could be sold. There's no confusion in your mind about this being somehow operated as a hotel room or part of a hotel or something, that selling them off as condos is
Well, it may be
anticipated.
being operated by the hotel, that it functions more like a hotel room than a standalone residence, where if you went to a condominium unit in downtown Seattle, you might have one owner who lives there permanently for 15 years. There are condominium units in hotels that are rented on a more regular, on a transient basis, as opposed to, year-round or something of that nature.
I have Councilmember Sunwall and then Shepherd and then Jeans, but before we move on to that, maybe it would be helpful if this isn't quite the typical condominium, if the applicant could speak to exactly what is intended here for the use of these, or how they're managed, and what is the experience of someone living in one of these units?
Thank you. I'm gonna defer to Rachel, who was here when this original language was being discussed and negotiated in terms of the specifics to answer Councilmember Mayhew's questions. But I wanted to point out a couple of things. First of all, I agree with Attorney Sturbank's description of the nature of the unit. It is intended to be part of the hotel. I can let Rachel speak to that a little bit more clearly. And last but not least, for what it's worth, as the council is looking at this issue matrix and the description that Jason provided here, which describes what phase 3 would be, either or, we are completely comfortable with the condition that's recommended near the bottom of the page on page 6 that says City Council could amend the Planning Commission recommended condition 3, subparts B and D, to ensure that phase 3 of the hotel is constructed as described above. So, if that helps answer any questions, we are entirely comfortable with that approach. Rachel, did you want to?
Well, even though it seems like it's in a separate building, that does not mean they are not part of the hotel. We have multiple elements to the hotel that are not all sharing one or common wall. So yes, it is, these managed residential units are very much a part of the hotel. They are individually owned, and owners have the option to opt in to management by the hotel. So they get services by the hotel, housekeeping, concierge, spa facilities, everything that comes with that a hotel guest would get, you could have. They are not intended and will not be permitted to be used by a third-party renter, for example, Airbnb or something like that. That would be restricted. They will be under the guidelines of a homeowner association, the same way any condominium would, and that would be managed by the hotel. That's overseen by the hotel and sort of run by the hotel. So it may seem odd, and I will admit to you, they were odd to me because I have not actually experienced, seeing these out in use, but they actually, since I've done research on this with MG2, they are used everywhere. They are in many, many hotel packages, resorts, communities around the world. So this is not an unusual thing. It's just that perhaps some of us have not come and seen them before. So.
Thank you, Rachel. Councilmember Sunwell.
Yeah, so we see this happen a lot of places. Suncadia, this happens. Sun River, Oregon, this happens. It's not. Did I over?
Outside the record, I think.
Sorry about that. So I didn't just say that. So what I think is being said, and you kind of stole my thunder a little bit. When we think of a condo association, we think of a condo. It's managed by a condo association. The simplest way I can think of this is the condo association is the hotel. And with that comes, various kinds of, some condo associations have pools, some have hot tubs, some have other services. This will probably be one of the more robust condo associations out there because it's run by a hotel that has apparently other services that they can offer. So it does seem a little bit weird, but when you separate it out, as every condo that I can think of has a condo association. This one's no different. It just happens to be that the condo association is the hotel.
All right. For the sake of time, I'm just going to clarify real quick. Councilmember Mayhew, was your question satisfied? If not, then I'm going to come back. Okay, so Councilmember Shepherd. We'll come back.
Yeah.
I'll give you some update in a second.
So it's my understanding whenever we have a change in land use, we're supposed to have a public hearing. And I don't know that we had a public hearing when this change was made to the developer agreement.
This change was made, and this actually partially answers Councilmember Mayhew's question. The change to the project entitlement occurred with the Fourth Amendment, which was back in 2010. At that time, the entitlement dropped from 250 or 270 residential units to 175, and the condominium unit allocation or allowance also came into being at that time. The other thing, the Fourth Amendment...
it was not unit, it was the number of hotel units that dropped, not the... Correct, Rachel? Or, yeah.
Okay.
You said residential units.
Oh, right. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. So there was an adjustment made to the project entitlement at that time. The Fourth Amendment had to be approved by the City Council in an open meeting. I believe there was likely a resolution associated with that. So it was certainly not done in secret, and there was certainly opportunity for public comment at that time. That was 8 years ago.
Also, there was no change in land use because the land use designations for the parcel are planned residential and planned commercial industrial, and the code speaks to what uses are allowed, and condominium multifamily is allowed.
Point of order, I'm not sure I'm being asked to adjudicate whether the restated agreement is valid or not. That was done, it's gone to court, it's done. It is a condition we need to validate against, but we're not asked to judge whether that restated agreement is in standing or not.
I'll sustain the point.
I disagree.
Did you have another question, Councilmember Shepherd? Or on a different topic or?
It just the same issue that I have, and that my concern is there have been a lot of changes, and from my understanding and reading the RCW for developer agreements, that they're supposed to have a public hearing whenever there's any significant change in use.
And we complied with all public hearing requirements or public comment.
Yeah,
in all those
sorry the
processes.
councilmember feels that way. We did have public hearing, rather boisterous, if I remember.
I think for all those that were here know that we fully complied with all that, so that's not in dispute. Councilmember Jeans.
I have also been troubled by the phrase managed residential, and the first time I saw that, I thought of a timeshare. But I think you have explained, you the applicant, have explained that it's individually owned and it can't be rented out. So I assume whether timeshare would be appropriate or not, I now assume these are not timeshares, and therefore I have nothing to raise.
good with this.
Thank you, Councilman Lissay.
I'd just like to, for some reason, I'm not talking very loud today. I'd like to move forward with also then updating the recommended condition number 3 as the applicant had indicated, that it is confusing that under subparts B and D, it implies that they could have both 182 hotel rooms and 60 managed residential units, when in fact it's either or based upon certain conditions. So I would like to see some restating of that condition to address as staff has indicated in the matrix.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
And I'm going to stop when council members sort of give that direction and sort of say, is there any objection? In other words, I don't want one council member sort of causing a lot of work if they're not in agreement with the majority of the council or the council members. So,
Good.
All right.
I agree with it, because I think I've seen 182 and 60 managed residential units. So it sounds like it's not going to be that.
Sure.
Right.
Right, yeah, and the way the condition is written right now, theoretically, they could build both 182 hotel rooms and 60 condos, which...
But that was not the intent.
Yes, it's not the intent, and we can certainly clarify that. I mean, we pointed it out directly in the issue matrix.
No objection from the applicant. Jason, you understand what the request
Yes.
is? Okay, we'll get that clarified. Councilmember Mayhew.
So I, the sole remaining question I have related to these condominium units is related to affordable housing. So I think that, do we have an affordable housing list somewhere, or item somewhere later, and maybe I'll just keep my question on that till then?
There is.
I think that question be clarified. It's very clear as the city attorney just read that it exempts it in the developer agreement.
Yeah.
Okay, so if
Number
I have a
12,
question,
we
it's
have it
tough luck
later.
for me?
Number 12.
It's coming.
Under number 12, it comes up.
But that's pertaining to the residential part. I think your question, Councilmember Mayhew, is still about the condominium units on the hotel component of the program.
Well, the original question, which is number 12, is describe affordable housing requirements for the site, including for the managed residential units, if any. And there is an answer there, and so certainly we could
It's
discuss
not an
it
answer to
under that.
my question, so I'm just understanding, will I get a chance to ask my question, or I should just resign myself that I won't get an answer to my question?
I think since you're talking about the affordable housing connected to those residential units, that's the topic right now. You can get I thought that was answered. I'm asking the city attorney to go back to that language in the developer agreement again, which was really very clear that those units are exempted from the affordable housing.
Appreciate your opinion, Mayor, but I have not had my question. I'm not satisfied with my question, but
Could you
if
please
I
ask
don't
the
get to get
question
answered,
again?
then just tell me that.
Could you please ask the question again?
I'm just trying to be crystal clear that I understand this wording, because it's not clear to me, and I'm just trying to, it seems clear to the city attorney, it seems clear to you, it's not clear to me. The notion that there's these 30 units that could be owned by 30 people and could be lived in permanently by those 30 people, therefore functioning as housing. And so let's just suppose that that were to come to pass, unless someone can tell me that absolutely cannot come to pass, but I think it could. But so let's just suppose that. Then my question is, what's kicking in my head is this idea of why wouldn't there be a affordable housing requirement attached to that? Now, maybe the answer is, or I believe the answer is, because the agreement says so.
Correct.
Correct.
That's fine, as long as, and what I'm questioning is, it's not clear to me that that's in fact what the agreement says. So I'm just looking for some help in understanding this sentence where it seems to imply to me, I'm not an attorney, it seems to imply to me that these units were going to be used as hotel, transient, not lived in permanently. So I'm just trying to help understand how the sentence that's there, if you just help me understand how that actually, doesn't matter how they use it, it's just flat out, it was clear that it was, if you just help me try and understand which words in that sentence help me understand that.
There are multiple sentences. So the one is the sentence that I read in 2.1.3 that says, hotel and associated facilities may include condominium units as part of the hotel, which shall not be included in the residential unit cap set forth in Table 2. When you turn to Table 2...
Actually, the sentence you just said, though, I guess that just flat out says it, doesn't it?
Right.
Well, and just...
Table 2 further nails it.
Table 2 says, affordable housing, quantity, quote, 15% of the total residential units, excluding condominium units within the hotel.
See, that makes it
unquote.
less clear to me. within the hotel. I don't know, these are going to be standalone building.
They're physically part of the hotel.
No,
The
they're
hotel is
standalone
multiple
building.
buildings. And just as like the previous sentence, you have to read all of these sentences together. We're talking about the hotel and associated facilities may include condominium units as part of the hotel. And we have hotel units in different buildings in this proposal. And Mayor, if I can just finish.
Sure.
And those may include these condominium units, which this table makes very clear is not subject to the 15% affordable housing limitation. And the very next paragraph following Table 2, 2.2, affordable housing, quote, 15% of the total number of residential units, excluding condominium units within the hotel, if any, shall be developed on-site to provide housing for
Mr.
affordable.
Sturbank, what do the words, there are two words which I'm asking, what possible reason are they included? Within the hotel. Why are those three words there each and every time you read it? What do those words mean?
They mean as part of the hotel and associated facilities design as distinct from the residential portion of the development. And the reason for that distinction is that the residential portion, and I'm going to try to put my finger on the language, specifies that it's to include a variety of different housing types, not just standalone single-family, but townhomes, multifamily, condominium units. And so what this language, quote, within the hotel, unquote, that we're talking about in 2.1.3 and 2.2 is talking about the condominium units that are part of the hotel portion of the project as distinct from the residential portion.
That was going to be my point.
So how do we know if something's within the hotel?
If you look at the plot map of the entire project, it's very clear. One half of the project is the residential portion, the other is the hotel portion.
So was that plot map a part of this agreement? And was there that line there that you just referred to?
Yes.
There was an original
there's a
sketch that's like.
So what you're
10 or
saying
15
is
years.
if it's on one side of that line, then we know it to be within the hotel, and if it's on the other side, it's not, and that's why it's clear to you.
Yes, that's why it's
No, I'm
clear.
asking,
That's why
is
it's
that-
clear to me, yes.
Attorney Sturbank, is that right?
Councilmember Mayhew, to clarify, the next step in this process for the applicant will be to submit a binding site improvement plan, which will delineate where the hotel portion is and where the residential portion is. So you see this is from the application. All those things in color are part of the hotel development. And
That's
then
from the
this other-
application. I'm
this from
asking
the-
about the agreement.
We will, for all future phases of this project, the hotel, the residential, everything, we will be looking back at this application. That's what some of the planning commission's conditions of substantial conformance are talking about.
What Councilmember Mayhew's pointing out is that this plat map comes after the agreement, not
Right,
before.
and
He's saying
exhibit-
when the agreement was written, what was the plat map? And there was a.
Exhibit B was the Salish Expansion's conceptual site plan that distinguished the residential portions from the hotel portion.
Okay.
In fact, we had a fair amount of discussion about that with respect to the amended and restated agreement because there had been some erroneous Photoshopped things put out on Facebook and elsewhere that purported to show the residential down located on the roundabout and the lower parking lot as opposed to where the residential portion is actually located as shown on the site map. So
is it, I think, was Appendix B included in our, it wasn't included in our materials?
It's not in
was it?
there because the PDF copy of the agreement I have doesn't have Exhibit B, but I believe the city attorney has it.
Okay, but
There's a
but you're looking at Exhibit B, Mr. Sturbank, right?
I'm not at the moment.
And you can see there's a line, okay.
But I know, but there is.
There's a line, and so that's how you answer my question. I think I'm getting to a
There's a longitude
resolution.
description. We'd have to draw it out to what it describes, but,
And
I'm recollecting that Exhibit B, Rachel or Terry, I don't know if you guys have that on hand, that there was a rough conceptual map that was shown years ago when it was more of a different kind of concept for hotel, but there was always that delineation between the northern residential portion and the southern hotel.
And this
portion.
condominium that's in this thing that we're actually looking at now, this proposal, is this condominium unit
Are part of the hotel
is
portion
in
of
the
project.
part of the
Yes.
land that was identified, and that's how we know, the answer to my question is how do we know it's hotel versus residential,
That's
not
my,
potato,
that's my
potato?
recollection. That's the source of my confusion, because I thought it seemed pretty clear, but then I recall, none of you probably recall seeing that original
Yeah.
map. And the only reason why I'm hesitating is, my point would be, support it if I could get a copy of that original.
All right, if I could just be assured that that's the case, then my question's answered.
I'm not sure if we can introduce it if it's not part of the record. but-
Well, the
no, it's
agreement's
in
the agreement's part of the record, so that exhibit is technically part of the record.
Just
even
not
though
part of my materials, that's
All
all.
right.
We don't have the actual material.
Right, and in the recorded version, which is what I'm looking at from online, because of the age of the document, it wasn't of sufficient quality that the recording office, the assessor's office would accept it, and so it says available at City Hall.
So could it be
in this
just a
particular
to-do
version,
to
but-
staff then, to go back and just verify this point, that this unit is within these?
We can bring it to you again at the next meeting.
Well, if
and
they would
show
just
it to
assure
everyone.
me that they've looked at it and that that's the
Yeah,
case.
yeah, and short of that, look at the property description of the boundary, using all the longitudinal lines to describe
Just
this.
establish that's how we know, and then I'm
Okay.
satisfied.
If that's helpful.
Thank you.
Councilman Lasay.
Is is staff satisfied that condominiums are part of the hotel?
Condominiums as specifically referred to in the sections of the agreement that the city attorney described, 2.1.3, 2.2.
I think he's looking for a yes or no.
Yes or no
Yes.
question.
You mean in the project?
Can staff sufficiently say that managed residential or condominium units are a part of the hotel project, part of the hotel part of the project?
The answer is yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you, I'm
However,
satisfied, let's move on.
I'm caveating it because.
Jason, thank you.
Thank you, I'm
Okay.
satisfied, let's
The
move
answer is
on.
yes. Okay. Are there any questions on this issue?
Can we talk
All
about
right.
trees?
Sorry, folks, we said I'm going to try and move this along.
We talked about getting through this, guys. We just spent 30 minutes talking about the definition of is.
That reminds me of a.
Moving on. Okay, the next one was about views, and this discussion largely combined itself with the tree retention issue, and so this is mostly relating to how visible would or would not the project be from Snoqualmie Falls, from the viewpoint. Like I said, a lot of discussion revolved around trees because so there's two viewpoints the applicant analyzed. The first one from the end of the pedestrian bridge, terrain is going to block any view of the hotel from there because there's a little, wait, I may have that back. I think I have that backwards. Hold on. Let me double check because I had this in my head and then I lost it. Okay. So from the end of the pedestrian bridge, a combination of trees and terrain is screening the proposed hotel from view. For the viewpoint, the overlook for Snoqualmie Falls, terrain is screening the hotel from view. So even if you took all the trees out, you still wouldn't see the hotel, is what the applicant's visual analyses are showing. The other thing that bears clarifying here is that those cones, those triangles of view you're seeing in the view analyses represent, they flew the drone horizontally back and forth within that, so you can't see the drone when they flew it to the height of the hotel under any circumstance because either terrain or trees was blocking it. When they flew it up to 100 feet in the air, then you could see the drone in a couple situations. As far as ongoing visual impacts, the tree condition that we spoke about earlier would likely address that because we would be looking to ensure the necessary trees are maintained.
Okay, Councilmember Holloway?
Well, considering that, as stated, we've talked about a tree management plan up above, and the evidence as shown demonstrates blockage of the view of the hotel from the specified sites, I'd like to know if there are objections to move this as a closed item.
Good idea.
I agree.
Objection.
All right, seeing no objection, this item is closed, and we can move on.
Okay, traffic. So we started discussing this at the last meeting, and there's been a couple questions submitted here. The first one was just about what traffic studies have been done about, for access, potential impacts. There's a question about do the traffic studies address the I-90 SR18 interchange, and then there's also the question of do the traffic studies remain valid. So the traffic studies were originally done back in the early 2000s when the project was first conceptualized. That analysis included analysis of the interchange as it existed at the time. The analysis showed specifically an impact that needed to be mitigated at the time, the former configuration of Tokel Road where it met SR 202 and Mill Pond Road. It did not identify any need to mitigate impacts at the interchange. The city's mitigated determination of non-significance identified an impact to be mitigated at the interchange and conditioned it, and there's a condition as such. That condition was fulfilled in 2007 when WashDOT fully funded that improvement. So the impacts of this project to the interchange have been fully mitigated. I understand the interchange is a problem point today. It doesn't change the fact that the impact was mitigated. The impacts to the intersection of Tokel Road and SR 202 were addressed by the roundabout construction, and again, a condition of approval, or rather a mitigation measure in the MDNS. The applicant updated the traffic study in 2015. The city concurred in that update. And then there's a lengthy answer in the Planning Commission issue matrix, item number 10, about the short version is we are required to continue using the SEPA determination because there's no evidence to indicate it's faulty, is the very short version.
Yeah, I'm sorry, to indicate what, Jason?
There's no evidence in the record not addressed by that document, but also that the project has not substantially changed. And even given that, they're coming in numbers below what they were approved at and reviewed at.
One, as I recall, the impact could have been met by putting in a traffic signal or realigning Tokel and doing a traffic signal there, and the applicant voluntarily went above and beyond to put in a solution that was far more expensive and that we felt was much better than glowing lights at night or glowing traffic signal lights at night near the falls. Any questions on this, council? All right, so it better be no. Councilmember Jeans? Yeah, I almost got there.
I'm told that traffic studies have been done updated as recently as 2015. Somebody tell me whether Hampton Inn was figured into that, whether that would create traffic, whether the affordable housing would include traffic, and whether the proposed development at the mill site was factored in at all with respect to traffic.
The 2015 update specifically was analyzing the roundabout and the impacts that this project would generate on the roundabout. Now it did, I'm looking at it right now. I'm sorry, I have to scan through this really quickly because
From a broader brush, Mark, perhaps you could answer while Jason's looking that up.
So some background to it. The original 2001 or 2 traffic study analyzed traffic impacts along the parkway based on Snoqualmie Ridge 1 build-out. So any development within Snoqualmie Ridge 1, including the hotel and anything else in the business park, would have been analyzed at that time. That traffic study did not note any impacts to intersections on the parkway, other than the interchange, of course.
So the point being, Jason, that the overall analysis of Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2 was a certain number of units, a certain number of commercial build-out with projections that had a conservative factor built in, and we've seen no evidence. In other words, to answer your question, Councilmember Jeans, the 191 units. The build-out of the commercial area, including the Hampton Hotel, was part of those original factors. In other words, the number of allowed residential unit counts was actually lower by a factor of several dozen units, I think. And so there actually, you add the 191 affordable units, for example, that's pretty much the end of the residential units, and that number is actually lower than it was originally estimated in terms of traffic impacts and number of units. Would that be accurate, Jason?
Yes.
Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Ross.
So the 2001 study, when they actually did the count, that was before my home was built. So how did they, and I'm in SR1, so how does that work? as far as accounting for the traffic?
We know because Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2, for that matter, are, they're under development agreements, and so the full entitlement was known. So we can run a traffic model that accounts for residential units that are not built. The same way we can do a traffic analysis for the Salish project, even though it's not built yet. It's essentially the same methodology. So even though your home and many other homes were not built at that time, we knew they were coming, and so that traffic was taken into account by the traffic models at the time.
As part of the SR1 analysis. Right. Councilmember Ross.
So in your write-up, you state that the city's transportation consultant, Fair and Pierce, reviewed the 2015 traffic study and confirmed the study's conclusions. So do you know about when did they do that? And I'm assuming if it was recent, then they would have taken into account the Hampton Inn and DEFCO and all those different things.
This would have been in late 2015 because the updated traffic study is from September 2015, and so we would have sent it to our consultant, right then, and they would have gotten it back, I'm sure, before the end of the year.
Okay, so it was then. Okay.
So I will say it has been a couple years, but they did confirm it. And like I said before, the ridge build-out was fully accounted for in the traffic study.
Right, and DevCo was accounted for in the SR2 environmental review as part of that development agreement and mixed-use final plan approval.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So my understanding when we went through this with Snoqualmie Hills West is that, let me just forget that. So my understanding with traffic studies in general is that they're forecasts. Right? That's how you can do a traffic study in 2001, and when you come up to 2018, you find out you still nailed it, because these have been going on for decades using mathematical equations that are very precise and very good. Our traffic study that we had done, I believe in 2015, which is referenced, showed that those confirmed that this traffic study done in 2001 nailed it. Of course, the interchange was not factored in, arguably shouldn't have been. It's outside of city limits. Obviously, that has an impact, but I don't understand how that can have an impact on our decision here today.
That's correct. And I'll state my view. That is a washed-out project that's long overdue. So while with each of these analyses, SEPA reviews and so forth, and concurrency within the city and levels of service, they're being met. The I-90 SR 18 exchange is outside the city, is a washed-out project, and is competing with every other city. So it's coming, and Mayor Larson and Senator Mollett have worked to chop 7 years off that timeline based on it not being in the transportation bill. But that issue is being addressed separate from all the concurrency and SEPA within the city, which is doing quite well. What we saw with Panorama is the actuality is performing at about 1/3 of what that analysis showed. So it's coming in even better than anticipated. What the review is saying is that the conditions are still being met and are valid.
Thank you.
To dial it back to the record just slightly, the original traffic study for the Salish project referenced both the original SR1 traffic studies as well as the 2000 update, if you will, that was going out to confirm how are we doing. And so that information was also used, similar to what Mark was referring to, but what I'm referring to is actually in the document.
All right.
So are we ready to move on to water?
No more questions on that issue?
Traffic.
All right.
Is the issue closed?
Well,
all right. If there's no,
I think Jim has one.
Oh, Councilmember Mayhew.
So this topic of the ingress and egress from the Falls parking lot from Highway 202 is raised in this development agreement. There's discussion about it being right turn entrance, right turn exit only. And so what I'm wondering is, since that seems to be part of the topic here, could we find out if the applicant would agree to, and could we require a condition that it be right turn entrance only, no exit? In other words, all the exit would have to happen by Tokel Road.
Oh.
You mean right in access on 202 and then
Exit by Tokel Road only.
right out access?
Well, we don't
What
have.
would be the?
We don't have Mr. Marcinko or his staff here. I don't think you would want to do that, because that would mean that trips where people were in the parking lot and wanted to go to Fall City and north would then have to go out and through the roundabout and past the falls again. So you would be loading those trips through the roundabout a second time instead of having them come out and go down the hill.
Implications. I could tell you the other implications, but I was really just asking a question. Can we? And would they object?
And what would the factual basis for impact be?
Reduce the traffic impact that we currently have, which is very significant in that particular location on 202.
Can I suggest we,
Based on what study?
Bob, can I suggest we address that
in a closed
session?
Yeah, sure. I agree.
All right, so that issue is not closed. On to the next one. Or, I'm sorry, Councilmember Shepherd on that issue.
Will this have to be reviewed by WASDOT? Just access onto the lot from 202.
So the Salish expansion project, the hotel component and the residential component do not have direct access onto SR 202, and so WashDOT has already reviewed this as part of the SEPA analysis and as part of the Toco Roundabout project. Access changes to the lower lot, accessing onto 202 may require WashDOT concurrence, if you will, on those changes.
They will be in the room that day, whether it's J barriers, right turn in, right turn out signage. They will be in the room.
It's typical, we can't do any proof. It's on state routes without the state's signatures and buy-off and approval eventually,
This is a suggestion regarding a parking lot access. That's not a change to the state route.
I'm sorry, I was responding to Councilmember Shepherd's question about, in other words, the state would review any kind of changes we make on access issues to a state highway.
To a private parking lot off to 202.
You currently have a left.
Well, I think we should come back to this in closed session to discuss the lower lot access.
To the extent it involves any sort of traffic regulation on 202 in front of the existing parking lot by the bridge, WashDOT will be involved.
Well, it doesn't. So the question is about ingress and egress from a parking lot.
It depends how you would accomplish that. If you propose to accomplish limitations on ingress to a private parking lot by virtue of a C curb in the center of SR 202 that prohibits a left turn into the parking lot, then now you're doing changes to a state highway.
I don't recall saying that. You recall me saying that?
Yes, your question was about limiting it to right turn in only and no egress.
At that location.
Right. So that would mean no left turn entrance into that parking lot at that location.
Right.
Which implied to me some measure of preventing people from making that.
Because I wasn't implying that.
Oh, okay.
Is that a code, Bob, or is that?
Are there any other questions on traffic, or should we move on and come back to traffic at a later point?
I'm sorry? Yeah, we're going to address that one later. Any other questions on this issue?
Let's move on.
All right, let's move on.
Water. So the question was to describe the project's proposed water use in relation to the city's water supply. So in the record, and it's one of the last one or two tabs, there is a letter from the city's utility operations manager, Todd Saxberg, to the applicant's engineer detailing the water usage proposed for the project and that the city can support that. The development agreement has provisions about reserving water capacity and sewer capacity for that matter. And so this capacity has been reserved since the original development agreement was signed in 2004.
I think it's suffice to say, and just for the sake of time again, there has never in the history of this project been any question that we had capacity to serve this project, and it's been held in reservation for years.
Right. As to how it affects the city's overall water supply, that is likely a question outside the scope of this project, and the council should discuss that in a different setting. In the Parks Public Works Committee, for example, because it's not, strictly speaking, germane, because as the mayor noted, we've been reserving the water capacity for over a decade for this project.
Councilmember Sunmo.
So as chair of the committee you just referenced, I want to make sure I understand this. So what is part of the record is that we have reserved a certain amount of water for this project for years.
Correct.
Right? What is not part of this record is how that amount of water that's been reserved relates to other demands on the city and potential reservations on future water.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. If there's any other questions on this item, or can we move on? All right. If there's no objection, we'll consider this item closed. Going once, going twice. All right, we're moving on. Next topic.
Stormwater management. The applicant detailed at least a very generalized system of stormwater ponds to deal with the stormwater. The specific details will be worked out later during engineering review. We don't expect applicants to design a full stormwater conveyance system at the master plan level. The applicant will need to comply with the city's current regulations for stormwater management, which is the 2016 King County Surface Water Design Manual. And we have a very good engineering consultant that reviews this stuff for us.
Councilmember Ross and then Sunwell. I'm doing a little round robin, Sean.
So just to get an understanding, so they'll have their own stormwater system. They will not be connecting into our stormwater system?
Correct.
Okay.
But they're still going to pay stormwater fees, right?
Oh, yeah.
Makes sense.
Councilmember Sunwell.
Is this the place to discuss what hookup fees will be to the city, water, sewer, or is that in a different, is that not part of this process or not part where we are in the process?
I thought we had it somewhere else.
The specific amount is not part of the process. There's a particular paragraph in the development agreement that requires payment of then applicable direct connection GFCs, and I can.
And have those rates been established?
What's that?
Have those rates been established?
By the council, they're part of your.
So whatever the rates are at the
utility.
time of execution is what the rates are that they have to pay?
It's
Not the rates
actually-
from 20 years ago?
No, it's, well, and beyond that, it is the charges that are required by the then applicable ordinances as a condition of connection. So at the time they apply to connect to the water system and the sewer system, the rates will be whatever the rates are in effect by generally applicable ordinance at that time in the future.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions, Council?
And sorry, just Mayor, for the record, if council want to look at this later, we're talking about paragraphs 4.1 and 4.2 on water and sewer in the amended and restated development agreement. That's page 19.
Thank you.
So just as a process point real quick, or first of all, is there any other questions to this, or can we consider this matter closed if there's no further objections? Okay, stormwater is then closed and we'll move on. Process question real quick. Rather than now, because I'm afraid the conversation might go on a little long, we're going to pick this deliberation up, assuming time is going to allow during the council committee of the whole and the regular council meeting. And so I'm thinking toward the end of that conversation, we'll do another executive session to address this ingress egress issue that we talked about. So if you could all help remind me of that. Councilmember Sunwell.
I do feel like there's a decent possibility we can get through 8 and 9 before we need to start the next.
We're going to try.
Okay. Number 8, wind study. Have the effect of windstorms or high winds on trees and/or buildings been considered? And the answer is they would need to comply with the building codes, whatever they are in existence at the time they are applying for their building permits. And no other information is available about wind on buildings or trees.
Any other questions on this item, Council? All right, seeing no objection, we'll consider this matter closed and move on.
Number 9, site density. What's the density if they construct all 150 residential units? And this is only the residential units, so I'm not worrying about the hotel part. It gets you a gross density of just over 5 units per acre.
Any questions or comments on this item, or did you want time to read this a little more? Councilmember Lissay, and then Councilmember Ross.
No, I just wanted to get.
In the staff response originally, it addresses the 150 residential units. What about in terms of, is there, as far as the density then for the hotel managed residential units and other units, the entire project, I guess? I think I'm not clear on.
I didn't provide one because it's calculating, so commercial density is typically calculated with a floor area ratio or something similar, and so if I were to give you the density calculation for the entire site, it would be substantially lower, which is to say the residential density, because of course we're counting the whole site. But so it's kind of tough to, so I drew the line of the residential component is this big, and the hotel component is not. I can certainly do the number. I don't know.
Let me ask the question a little easier,
a
little differently, so you might be able to answer it. Are there density limits for the development in the Snoqualmie Municipal Code?
Look to the planned residential criteria, which can be varied from, and these are well within any sort of consideration. So whether it's 3, 4, or 5 for the overall 49 acres, what Jason is saying is we're calculating density for the residential component, finding 5.02, not counting commercial because those aren't traditionally density.
So your question could be like cluster them into small 20 by 40-foot lots or multifamily, and they leave a big forested area? Is that what your question is?
Yes, that's what I'm getting at. I mean, you could, if you take it as its entirety and calculate out density within the entire 29.9 acres, but all of the residential is being built on 5 acres, your density is going to look really good if you calculate it against the entire property. I'm just trying to get an idea of, are there limits in number of, I'm going to go to a housing requirement, sometimes you're limited to one unit, one residential unit per acre. So are there those sorts of requirements as well that would limit it?
So the allowed range for the planned residential zone is 4 to 12 units per acre.
4 to 12 per acre. Okay.
And they're at 5.
And you will have residential design guidelines. What you also have in the development agreement and the planned residential is, besides the design standards, is a variety of housing types, so not just single family, but also townhome and condo. This is predominantly single family by the ratios in the development agreement, but it is envisioned with open space to occupy most of that 29 acres minus stormwater, buffers, landscaping, streets.
So just to make sure, I want to make sure I'm clear. So I'm going to round up and round off because it makes it easier to understand. So we have 30 acres. And we have a density of 5.2 dwelling units per acre. So in that scenario then, I'm trying to figure out how that adds up to 150. Because it does.
30.
But how do they then calculate in the larger, I'm trying to figure out how that can be, how I ask this question.
Possible.
How is that possible when you have a larger park within the development? Is that park excluded from that acre calculation? I'm just...
So we're calculating the density for the residential component on the entirety of the residential component, including any parks that they do have to provide under the agreement.
Okay, so excluding the parks they have to provide under the agreement.
So the parks count against them essally in this case because it's acreage that they're providing, but they're clearly not going to put homes on it.
Yeah, see, I'm still confusing myself.
That's why I refer to gross acres to try to make it a little more clear that the net acre calculation is not even possible right now because we don't know how big the park would be exactly, how big the stormwater pond's going to be, et cetera, et cetera.
But regardless of that, there will be still, it's still conditioned upon no more than essentially 5 dwelling units per acre, regardless of how, if they want to build a bigger park and a smaller park and a middle-sized park.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you get 150 homes on 30 acres, the density is 5, no matter how you slice it. Now, if you start slicing things, and that's the gross density. Net density, of course, is going to be very different, but we're going to, if you will, continue to count the density this way.
In other words, even if you put 150 units on 1 acre, it's still, 5 per acre on the 30 acre.
So but I guess that's trying to figure out how to ask the question the right way, because I don't think I am. And that's that the net density is what's really important, because you could cluster all the parks into one area and have house upon house upon house upon house.
And I think that gets back to what Mr. Hoffman was mentioning about the residential design standards. Is another thing we have is a minimum lot size. So it's the code specifies 10,000 square feet. The staff's identified a deviation may be necessary depending on how the standards go, but that's your other method of ensuring you're not going to get this, say, a 20-story building hypothetically with all the units and then just nothing but green around it. Because that's clearly not the intent here. And so there are other tools to achieve that beyond just enforcing the density.
But then they can't do more than 35 feet now, so. I'm kidding.
Okay, just I'll end it because I'm taking all the time, but is there somewhere in, either under the findings of fact or conditions that address this?
You would be looking at condition, I believe, number 3, about substantial conformance. We can take another look at it. The language would be generalized in this case because it says substantially conform to the details of the development authorized by this master plan approval. So, like I said, the other thing that's going to come into play here are the residential standards that the council will have to approve at a later date. So that's another method the council can utilize to ensure the development will look like you're going to want it to look. The residential standards are going to be condition number 7 or 8, I believe.
So in other words, we'll have a chance to figure all that out later, right?
Correct.
Councilmember Ross, did you have a question on that?
It was similar to Councilmember Desai's. So.
Right. So I'm sorry, is this an open item we need to clarify? Are we good to go move on?
Right.
I'm going to have some questions. I think there's a place later for this to come up, but I have a question that's sort of related. It has to do with deviations and what they'll be and how they'll get approved and so on. But what you're at, we can bring that up at that time. You're just asking, yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah,
24.
That's number 15, so we'll get there.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I would also suggest that we covered off on number 10 in our meeting upstairs. Anyone else have any?
I'm sorry, which one's number 10? That's the density?
That's the next one, since we're moving on from site density.
It's timing and process.
Timing, review timing and process. Based on what I'm reading here, I think we covered off on that upstairs in terms of kind of what our deadlines are.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. You're saying we've already checked that box and we're done?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any?
I think so.
Any objections to that?
Certainly.
Same for number 11.
Hopefully the council would like.
Oh, for that matter, number 11. I think we'll probably revisit number 11 multiple times, but.
Okay, ready for 11?
Yeah, number 11 is the criteria for a decision on this project.
What we can and can't base our decision on.
Okay.
Which
and
we'll revisit, I'm sure, multiple times.
Well. Okay.
Although I don't necessarily agree on crossing that one off, because don't we need to go through the code on each one of those areas?
Well,
right, and that's what, I mean, this little box is pages.
Right. My only point was on that one, on number 11, is just to keep ourselves in check. We're going to be revisiting this a lot, just to make sure we, especially as we get closer to a decision, what we can and can't use. And so I think this is an open item, but nothing further to discuss tonight, I think was my point.
Right, okay. That it's not closed.
Okay.
Correct.
So if there's no
That won't be
objections, then
closed
we'll
until
move
the
on to
31st.
item 12.
Is this a conversation we
Well,
have?
okay, I guess we were scheduled, does everybody want to take a break? We were scheduled to stop 10 minutes before the regular council meeting, if everybody wants to.
Yeah, and I think
You want to take 5 more minutes, council, or just stop now?
I don't think this is a 5-minute conversation.
Number
is it?
12 is not a 5-minute discussion.
All right, so let's adjourn the meeting at this time then, and we'll re-adjourn with the regular city council meeting in 9 minutes at 7 p.m. sharp.
Oh, we did good.
I now call the Snoqualmie City Council meeting to order. All please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Ross, could you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time I'll ask the interim city clerk to please take the roll call.
Councilmember Jeans.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Here.
Councilmember Lassay.
Here.
Councilmember Sundwall.
Here.
And Councilmember Shepherd.
Here.
And Mayor Larson.
Here. All right, with that, we'll ask for a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as stated. Any discussion, council? Councilmember Shepherd will remove the warrants from the consent agenda.
Okay.
Councilmember Sunwall?
You don't know what I'm going to say?
No.
Is now the time to add something to the
Yes.
something of the whole, committee of the whole?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to add a discussion item around the Snoqualmie Visitor Center. It is somewhat timely.
All right. Is there any objection from the council members to add the visitor center to the agenda?
Do we need to vote? I second.
Yeah. So all those in favor?
That way.
Aye.
Opposed?
Hasn't done it.
Motion is
Committee
carried.
hasn't done it.
All right, so that item will be added on our committee of the whole. Councilmember Sun will ask you to make sure I don't forget.
Of course.
Any other items for the agenda, council? Councilmember Mayhew.
I'd like to motion that we add an item under committee of the whole to discuss the bond issuance interest rate.
All right.
I second.
Have a motion and a second. If there's no objection, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. We'll add that item to the under committee of the whole. Any other items for the agenda? All right, with those amendments as stated, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. At this time, we will provide time for citizens to comment on items not on the agenda, but first, a few ground rules. One, Snoqualmie citizens who are not present have a right to have their elected representatives perform their duties on behalf of the city in an efficient and orderly manner. Therefore, comments will be limited to 3 minutes each. Please wait to be recognized, come to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Direct your comments to the council as a whole and not to individual members. Please note that this is not a time to ask questions of the council, mayor, or staff, or to engage in debate. The council will quietly and respectfully listen to your concerns. And lastly, please respect the decorum of these proceedings, as all due respect will be afforded to you. So with that, is there anyone who would like to speak at this time? Monica.
Hi, Monica Lanny, P.O. Box 493. So I was at a council meeting a month ago, and there were some questions asked by Bob Sturbanks to council members regarding possible conflicts of interest regarding the quasi-judicial process and the vote that will be coming soon on the Salish expansion. So as I sat and listened to the questions Mr. Sturbank asked, I noticed that Bob Jeans as well as Sean Sunwall were not present. So I would like to request the city does ask those questions to these two individuals. In the meantime, I would like to ask that any council member that has had a membership at the Ridge up at Snoqualmie, which is directly affiliated through, I believe, Columbia Hospitality, and directly tied into the Salish Lodge, in which you actually receive a 20% discount. I know this because I'm a member myself, relinquish themselves from voting. I believe that's a conflict of interest. We also know that Catherine Ross expressed her daughter worked at the Salish all last summer while living under her roof, which was, you know, sharing her home, and I believe that's a conflict of interest. Therefore, she should refrain from voting. We know that Matt Lassay has expressed he's had both personal and business relations with the professional architects, I believe, that are affiliated with the project. Therefore, I believe he should refrain from voting. As far as Bob Jeans, I know he has a club membership because I see him at the club. I'm pretty sure you do too, Matt. I'm not sure about James or anyone else, but you all know, and it's easy to find out. So I just wanted to make the statement because I know under quasi-judicial, unless a citizen steps forward and asks council members to step down and refrain from voting due to a conflict of interest, they're not obligated to do so. So please do so if you have any kind of a conflict, either personal or professional. The other thing I wanted to mention regarding the water, I know Brian Holloway mentioned water testing the city does in relation to things like arsenic, which is a general additive that we're not very concerned with. What we're concerned with is the mill site contaminants, and I'm glad to see these are the Salish attorneys, not mill site. But basically, some of the products that citizens are concerned with that can cause cancer for residents up at the ridge, which the north well is right next to the contaminated site, and that's where the water is being pumped up, and we have high levels of cancer in that area, would be creosote, PCBs, which is polychlorinated biphenyls. We have PBDEs, which are polybrominated diphenyl ethers, which were heavily used in the 90s for building materials, and lead, etc. So the city is not testing for any of these byproducts. We would like to request, as a citizen, I'd like to request that they do. And other than that, I think my time's up. So I wish I had more time, but I don't.
Thank you. Actually, you were afforded more time because we forgot to start the clock. Is there anyone else like to speak at this time? Yeah, Becky, go ahead.
Hello, Becky Bastian. Live on Maple and Maple, the end of Mayor Row, and Mayor, Council. So I had the pleasure of going into Issaquah today, and it's quite a sight to see. Okay, so I'm really going to get down to the nuts and bolts. Granted, development is inevitable. I'd really like to see somebody with some creative ideas. Everybody's buildings are looking alike. Issaquah, Everett, Linwood, Redmond, and everybody's up high, honking their horns, irritated as heck. I'd really like to see somebody come in with some Frank Lloyd Wright ideas and do something really special for Snoqualmie. And also, I heard, but I didn't see that there was a town hall meeting scheduled, and before some of these things get pushed through, it would really be lovely if some of us citizens had an to be able to say, give ideas, and to be listened to. The committee meetings, we don't get a chance to comment, and I'd really like to know where the avenue is where the citizens could be heard. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Becky. Is there anyone else that would like to comment at this time? All right, seeing no one else move forward, we'll move on to public hearings, presentations, proclamations, and appointments. And it's my pleasure at this time to read a proclamation pertaining to the fire department. Whereas the city of Snoqualmie, Washington is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living and visiting the Snoqualmie, and whereas fire is a serious public safety concern both locally and nationally, and homes are the location where people are at greatest risk from fire, and whereas the majority of U.S. fire deaths, 4 out of 5, occur at home each year, and where Snoqualmie residents should identify places in their home where fires can start and eliminate those hazards, and whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in reported home fires in half, whereas Snoqualmie residents should install smoke alarms in every sleeping room outside each separate sleeping area and on every level of their home, and whereas Snoqualmie residents should listen for the sound of the smoke alarm, and when it sounds, respond by going outside immediately to the designated meeting place, whereas Snoqualmie residents who have planned and practiced in home fire escape plan are more prepared and will therefore be more likely to survive a fire, and whereas Snoqualmie's first responders are dedicated to reducing the occurrence of home fires and home fire injuries through prevention and protection education, whereas Snoqualmie residents are responsive to public education measures and are able to take action to increase their safety from fire, especially in their homes, and whereas the 2018 Fire Prevention Week theme, Look, Listen, Learn, Be Aware, Fire Can Happen Anywhere, effectively serves to remind us that we need to take personal steps to increase our safety from fire. Therefore, I am Matthew R. Larson, Mayor of the City of Snoqualmie, do hereby proclaim October 17 to 13, 2018 as Fire Prevention Week throughout the city, and urge all people of Snoqualmie to be aware of their surroundings. Look for available ways out in the event of a fire or other emergency. Respond when smoke alarm sounds by exiting the building immediately, and to support the many public safety activities and efforts of Snoqualmie's Fire and Emergency Services during Fire Prevention Week 2018. Chief, thank you. And do you want to receive that on behalf of the Community Fire Department? Oh. thanks for all the great work you and the guys do to keep us safe in the community. Appreciate it. I think that's probably a good time to note also, I think it's an effort due to the common effort of all departments and many citizens here, but we've always been in the top 5 or so of safest communities in the state of Washington. And highest we've gotten is number 3 and never took the top spot, but this year we did get the top spot from SafeWise as number 1 safest community in the state of Washington. That's it says quite a bit about our community, so very excited to hear that. With that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Again, this is with everything excepting the warrants, including minutes for the September 24, 2018 workshop and regular meeting of the council and the September 27th, 2018 special meeting of the council. Approval of warrants as stated in the agenda packet. Other approvals include Resolution 1466, declaring surplus property and authorizing the sale of surplus property. That's the 2004 van and miscellaneous computer equipment. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. So revise that to please remove the warrants. I thought I did that. I was trying to look back. My apologies. So that does not include the warrants. Agenda Bill 18, Resolution 1466, declaring surplus property and authorizing the sale of surplus property. This is 2004 van and miscellaneous computer equipment. Agenda Bill 18122, lease agreement with Pacific Office Automation, replacement at the fire department. Do we have a motion, council? Again, this is consent agenda without warrants.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as stated. Any discussion? All those, is there any member of the public that would like to comment on any of these items prior to action? All right, seeing no move forward. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. With that, we will move on to ordinances. Finance Administration Committee, Agenda Bill 18123, ordinance providing for a revised process of city review and approval of claims for payment made against the city, amending section 2.04.020 and chapters 3.32 and 3.36, providing for a new chapter 3.85 and providing for severability and effective date. This is only for introduction tonight. However, is any discussion at this time? Or first, I'll open it for any public comment on this item for any discussion prior to any potential future action. All right, seeing no one move forward. Any discussion, council?
I think this is along the lines of what we've discussed prior. We're really getting into the process now, a little bit of a rough start, but we'll learn as we go how to proceed through these things. At least this codifies what we're doing.
All right, if there's no further discussion, we'll move on. And to reports, Committee of the Whole will take up the warrants at this time. So if someone could make a motion to put those on the table, please. In a second.
I can't read. Do I have to read the whole thing?
Just say move to approve warrants as stated in the agenda package.
Move to approve warrants as stated in the agenda package.
Second.
You have a motion and a second to approve the warrants as stated in the agenda packet. Any discussion, council?
Other than this is introduction tonight, actual approval will occur next council.
I'm sorry?
For the warrants?
Yes. Yes, that's what we set out at F&A.
Oh, they weren't, so that's right, F&A pulled the warrants, correct?
Right, so introduction tonight, actual approval next council meeting.
Okay, so it'll be lumped with the warrants for next time as well. Councilmember Shepherd, I'm sorry, you had your hand up first. Did you want to add anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay, you were there, so you recall that too.
Okay.
All right, so there actually will not be action on the warrants tonight.
Okay.
All right, other items for the Committee of the Whole. We had a couple questions, Councilmember Sunwall, if you want to.
Yeah, so we met, I chair the LTAC committee, and for, in brief, the LTAC that's money that comes from tourism, basically. So right now, it's mostly the Salish. That will change, obviously, with the Hampton Inn coming on, and eventually down the road with the should it be approved, the Salish expansion. One of the applicants was the art gallery, the art galleries, that's what we call it, right? The art gallery here downtown, which for at least a year or two has served as our information center, basically visitor information center. They had requested $29,000 in money again this year for LTAC. Our entire committee was unanimous in our non-approval of that. By the way, you'll see the LTAC next council, I believe, Joan, will we approve that as council? The ones that were funded?
It has to go to CD first.
That's right. So in the next meeting or two, we will, as a council, choose to approve or disapprove of what we came up with in the committee.
Just for the record, because Joan was far from a microphone, she said those would have to go to the Community Development Committee first.
Yeah, so those will go to Community Development Committee first.
Council Working Committee.
And so the reason we held back on that is we feel like before we give $29,000 away to any organization, we need to understand kind of the small elephant in the room from a tourism perspective is what we want our visitor center to look like. Do we want there to be a physical visitor center? Do we want a tree house? Do we want nothing? And so our thought was until council comes up with a midterm or longer term solution on what our tourism visitor center looks like, we aren't willing to fork over $29,000, which is about a little more than a fourth of the entire LTAC budget, to an organization that serves that function. So we can talk about it, not at all, but when you get that bill before us or that agenda item before us in a council meeting or two and you see that missing, I want to let you understand why that's missing. And I do think they're welcome to apply at a future time. But again, our feeling in that committee was until the city has a formalized plan for what we want or don't want out of a visitor information center, we're not willing to fork over more than a quarter of the budget to fund that. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Councilmember Holloway.
Well, just for discussion, I mean, it seems to me a visitor information service is like an archaic remnant of the past. People don't come into town and look for the visitor information center to decide what they want to do. It's all done online. And so 29,000 seems quite a bit, and frankly, I don't think there are many people who can find the visitor information center, even though I know where it is. Mm-hmm. I'm not aware of there being a prominent sign out in front of the art gallery, but I'm not sure even if I saw that and I was from out of town, if I'd go into that art gallery and say, hey, where's the best pizza place? So I think you're probably on the right track of being very critical and concerned about that expenditure, and so I would question it also. Maybe if I learn more, maybe I would want to put something into that, but $29,000 doesn't make sense.
Councilmember Holloway.
I'm kind of torn on it because when we entered into the agreement, there were statements of performance and metrics that was being done that they were providing the service. So I'm a little concerned that I'm not sure I disagree with what you did. I'm a little concerned, though, of balling together what we might do in the future to a decision today, in that if you want an information center, what are you going to do? Well, that is, in today's standpoint, that is immaterial to treehouse, outhouse, whatever you want to have as an information center, okay? But I also hear Mr. Dean. I agree also that nobody drives into town anymore and looks for the information center. They look online.
Yeah, as I recall, in some ways,
that consideration should be
in some ways,
taken.
the logic was it was a quick interim solution until a more permanent one had been determined. So I think that's your point that you're getting to.
Yeah, I mean, we had an interim solution, but it wasn't the solution.
Yeah.
Councilmember Song.
And our thought is that unless a visitor, because we thought along the same lines, is that really what you do anymore, right? And our thought was unless the visitor center itself is an attraction, treehouse, for example, or a train car or something like that, unless it was an attraction, something to go visit that in and of itself, that we have to really question it. And since the money it's not a use it or lose it, it rolls over. Do we save that money for, one example that was thrown out, and I'm not saying this should or shouldn't happen, but, if we save that $29,000 in 2019 and someone came forth with a great proposal of, how we shuttle people, we pay for a free shuttle to shuttle people from the falls to downtown, just a crazy idea. But If that was determined to be a more middle-term solution, that might be money better spent than trying to force what they came up with. I think it was about 7,200 people visited that. Take that as a comparison to the train museum here that had over 100,000. And by the way, Richard suggested that they could have the visitor center for significantly cheaper, right? So, people already come to a train center, for example, in droves, tens of thousands. And so, again, I don't want to belabor this point, but I think I also don't want it to be lost. I don't want us to simply just say, yeah, maybe that isn't the best spot. I do want this to be a bit of a forcing function for Bob's committee in CDC to do something we all know that we need to address, but it's kind of fallen off because it's sort of a tier 2 thing. Well, we are 5 months away from the beginning of the next summer season, right? So if there's any way for you guys to get that on your CDC plate to figure out, what is our middle term or long-term solution rather than just focusing on what we fund or don't fund, so that when it does come time to fund something, it's based upon a larger plan that's focused on driving tourism from the number 2 tourist spot in the state to our awesome town. That was our philosophy. So, if you have further comment, great. Other than that, I just wanted to introduce that today.
I did want to, I should have told him sooner, Bob's looking it up as we speak, but I know that the LTAC committee is a strange animal as defined by state law. Some people sort of say, hey, there's a conflict of interest because there's like a person who receives monies and the person who provides monies, like a manager of the Salish Lodge and Richard from the Railway Museum, for example. But the state defines the composition of that committee to sort of have that built-in conflict of interest. So it's by design. Furthermore, it's a little more than just a recommendation, where they make a recommendation to council. Council has a certain limitation, as I understand, on how you can change those recommendations. So I think that was part of
You can accept or reject. You cannot alter.
So that was part of what you were bringing to their attention is, hey, we did this thing that might not make some of you happy. Just beware. But do you want to speak to that, Bill?
Well, sure, and I think you summarized it well, Mayor, but essentially the statute, I'll just quote it, says the municipality, meaning the city council, may choose only recipients from the list of candidates and recommended amounts provided by the local lodging tax advisory committee. So the council doesn't have the usual freedom it has to adjust, modify recommendations that come to it from citizen commissions when we're talking about the lodging tax advisory committee. And that's just what the statute says.
Okay. Councilmember Shepherd.
So I noticed that we don't seem to have anything about when LTAC meets on the calendar. Is it something that we can add to our calendar so that it can be made available?
I think is it a standing meeting, Councilmember Sunwell?
It's standing when we show up, except we're sitting down.
It's like every Thursday at 6.
No, applications come in 3 to 4 months in advance of the coming year. Joan pings us all, when can we meet? We met on Tuesday, Wednesday, last week, something like that.
Thursday, maybe?
And we'll meet again when the opportunity provides, when there's another applicant or some other reason to meet.
Okay, so it's
Right.
only a few times a year?
And I don't know, is that a public meeting?
They all are, and
Yes.
so I did not get that on the calendar. I'm sorry for that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll make a point to get that on the calendar next time. Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Shepherd. Any other comments on this item, folks? All right, Jim.
Well, I thought the rest of the council might be interested to know, and members of the public might be interested to know that we issued, so we've undertaken a pretty major utilities CIP capital improvement plan over the next 5 or 6 years. We're spending about $55 million, which is a lot of money for a city, for this city. And as part of that, over the early part of this year, we debated how to go about some of the funding for that, a big chunk of the funding for that. And we ended up going out with a bond, a little north of $30 million. And as you'll all remember, we spent some time trying to decide how much we should go out for. And I just thought you'd be interested in some information. So that bond went out on September 6th. So it's just a month ago. So 1 month later, on this past Friday, I went and looked at the rates. So on September 6th, when it went out, the 30-year Treasury rate, so we did a 30-year bond, the 30-year Treasury rate was 3.06%. This past Friday, 30 days later, it was 3.35%. So that's about what we call 30 basis points, or 0.3%. So what that tells us is that difference in the Treasury rates would just translate through pretty much percentage for percentage into our rate. So if our rate, which was 3.65%, had been 0.3% higher, it would have been 3.94%. So 394 instead of 365, which is what it went out for. So that's a roughly 30 basis point savings by getting those bonds out a month ago instead of waiting till now. And as you remember, we then started to push very hard to get that done when we did. When we decided to go for the larger amount, fund a whole additional year of that CIP, our advisors told us that the break-even point would be about 30 basis points. So, in fact, we achieved that break-even 30 basis point break-even point in just 30 days. So we have saved an enormous amount of money by getting that out when we did and getting it out for the larger amount. We have saved an enormous amount of money for our ratepayers. And I just wanted to sort of bring that to your attention and and compliment the team at the city for getting that done. This is a job very well done, and it means a fairly significant amount to our ratepayers.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Mayhew. Yeah,
can you put a hard number to that?
Actually, they could put it, but it is, I won't shoot from there. It was several $100,000, but fairly high up, and it was a fair amount. We could actually have the finance director obtain that number from the advisor. So I'll ask him to do that and either report to us or I'll report it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Mayhew, and kudos to Robert and all the team and Deanna, and I just blanked on Thomas, yes, Thomas, for the great work they did. I'm sure they'll appreciate hearing that.
Sorry, Mayor, what I meant to say too also is that, you know, we focus very hard on the spending of that money and keeping those projects within budget or under budget. But as we think about how we manage that, managing the funding side of that was a pretty significant feature of what we did as well. And let's keep track of that as we sort of monitor this project out and sort of consider how we did.
Councilmember Summerall.
Well, if I remember correctly, there was a lot of conversation on this council about do we sit on it? Do we go quickly? Do we go for the smaller amount? Do we go for the larger amount? So, and I don't even remember what the vote total was, but I mean, you know, congratulations to the council for particularly those who kind of saw what was happening to get this done, because obviously, had we waited, that would have been a significant cost. So, Jim, I know you're a big part of helping us non-financial people understand the value of moving forward for the larger amount and quickly. So thank you for your leadership on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Summerall. All right, any other items for, well, I guess we didn't vote on the other items, so with that, we're going to move on Committee of the Whole for, come back to Agenda Bill 18123.
Hey, Matt.
Yes.
I thought we had a discussion on meeting times for this and other things we were going to go through.
Okay, I don't have it on my notes, but I think you're correct. You were going to have a.
I'll take it.
Yeah, no, I remember. I think we ended the last meeting that you were going to have. You wanted to discuss with some of the members about maybe moving some of the committee meetings around.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
And I don't have it either, but I will know. Was it the 25th? We had discussions, which was a Thursday, of having a. Is that the correct date? Somebody can correct me, but it was a Thursday. We were having another budget discussion. The 25th is also the date in which the Association of Washington Cities will be in this very room. And many members, including the mayor, would like to attend AWC at that time versus.
I have that one the day before on the 24th.
24th. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we already moved that.
We rescheduled it.
That one we already moved.
We moved that one.
We moved that one. All right. I know that was moving from a Thursday where else said to a Wednesday.
Right.
Yep. And that was particular. We've kept the one on the 29th there, but tell you the truth, depending on where we go, That can either be Salish or that can be budget, but both will be contending for your time. So I'm going to ask for some leniency. There's 7 of us, so occasionally some of us can do work or go vacation or do whatever. We've got to keep that schedule going and keep it going. If it doesn't match with your schedule, I apologize, but we got to move forward. Okay?
Is he trying to say don't go to Brazil?
Councilor
I was just going to say that, yeah, I've been able to free up some of my schedule. The one I'm going to be struggling with is the 18th. So I will get here as soon as I can. That might be closer to 7 o'clock than 5 o'clock, but I will get here as soon as I can. I appreciate that there was some consideration of that, so.
Okay. All right, I think that covered the conversation.
All right, thank you. Councilor Shepherd?
Okay, so I did send a request to add tree canopy preservation enhancement code from.
Councilor Shepherd, you did not ask at the beginning of the meeting to add that to the agenda.
So I can't do it now.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you can't. I mean, you didn't request the members or vote on that. I mean, you could do it now, I suppose, if you want to ask them to add it.
So I think, go ahead, make a motion.
I'd like to have us.
Or make a motion, please.
I'd like to make a motion that we.
Or make the motion.
Okay.
Move to add.
I move to add that we send this to committee to talk about the tree canopy preservation enhancement code from Lake Forest Park and find out how it meshes with our code.
Okay, at this point, it dies for lack of a second, but I encourage you to perhaps bring it up at one of the committee meetings to discuss further. And actually, Bob Surbank does have valuable information. You might want to inquire asking him about that because he actually wrote that ordinance in Lake Forest Park. Or helped write the ordinance. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on to, I don't think there's any other items for committee of the whole other than the Salish expansion. So we're going to return to discussing Agenda Bill 18111, Resolution 1461, approving the Salish expansion plan residential and planned commercial industrial master plan, PCI 180001, and adopting the Planning Commission's finding of fact, conclusions of law, and recommended conditions of approval. This is just for discussion tonight. So with that, council, we'll pick it up. Did you need to?
That literally was in the record. Like, close to it.
Mr. Mayor, we still have an executive session to do after this? Should we consider doing that first?
There is no, yes, we do, but we plan on doing an executive session in addition to address some of the items in this deliberation.
Are we going to need to extend the meeting past 10 o'clock? Should we just do that now?
We're only at 7:30, so we're cruising.
I know.
I'm hoping, yeah.
The skate park will be done by the time we're out of here.
Councilmember Jeans.
So that raises an issue in my mind. I mean, we could go till 2 in the morning on this. Do we have a goal as to how much time we want to put on this? We've already spent arguably 2 hours. It was less than that, but we spent some valuable time this morning. How much time do we want to spend?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, if the council wants to try and get out of here by 9, you might want to only spend an hour on this topic, and then we can stop debate and continue at those future scheduled meetings and spend a half hour on executive sessions.
I would propose, and I don't think this needs a movement or whatever, but just why don't we, that's not the kind of movement I meant. We work on this for an hour and then just sorry about we work on this for an hour and then we just do a check-in, see where we are.
So,
does that work?
Yeah, we can do a check-in, and what I mean is there's some executive session material pertaining to this, and I would suggest maybe in an hour or so we could about 8:30 go into executive session to spend what would probably be at least 20 minutes on Salish items and then shift to the other executive session item as well. That would take us probably just past 9 o'clock or 9:15, 9:30. All right, so that's the game plan. With that, did you want to do any, just a little house cleaning first?
As council remembers, typically at the beginning of each of the meetings on this session, I have polled council members with respect to the appearance of fairness doctrine. And some of those issues were brought up earlier this evening. So I guess the first thing that I would do is is to poll individual council members with respect to whether they've had any ex parte or off-the-record communications with either proponents or opponents of the project since the council last met. And I'll start with Councilmember Jeans.
No.
Councilmember Ross.
No.
Councilmember Holloway.
So, question, if I have dinner at the golf course, is that a conflict of interest? That would be applied by.
What did you have for dinner?
I'm not discussing my movements. Go on.
Oh, we're off the rails.
And it's only 7:30. If I may, I'd like to address that issue second. This is just with respect to off-the-record communications with opponents or proponents.
Okay.
And I'll come back to that.
So, other than, I do not have a membership, but I have availed myself of at least my mother's birthday party dinner at the lodge.
No,
just
not
Mr.
Holloway, did you have any
conflict.
conversations with anyone about this project?
No.
He's going to go through a
Or
series of
emails
questions.
with.
No.
Any
Okay.
correspondence?
Thank you. Councilmember Mayhew.
Yes.
Could you elaborate, please, for the record?
So I had two things. I received an email which from a citizen which included several items. The third item on that list, I was about halfway through the first sentence of the paragraph describing that item and realized it related to the Salish. I, by that point, had ascertained the person was opposed to the project. I stopped reading at that point. So I don't know everything that was in that email communication. I don't really know what the point of it was. So that was the communication, and I forwarded that email to you.
Okay, thank you, yes. And you're referring to an email from the individual who's addressed the council earlier this evening?
Yes.
Public session, all right.
Second item is that I also encountered the same individual and had a discussion with him over the weekend at a social event. And while I don't believe there was any discussion of the Salish, there was a discussion of a traffic study. I thought it was in relation to another item having to do with the Fisher intersection, but in retrospect, once I saw this email, I thought it's possible that that person might have perceived it. I did not perceive it, but I wanted to disclose that that conversation happened as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lassay?
I just also received the same email that Councilmember Mayhew received and forwarded it to the city attorney and copied the mayor and others. I also recognize that it was related to the topic at hand and didn't continue reading once I recognized that, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Sundwall?
I'm a little jealous I didn't get that email, so I have had no communications whatsoever.
Councilmember Shepherd?
I did have a conversation with one resident. I don't know that they had a strong preference one way or the other, but we ended that conversation very shortly.
Can you disclose anything about the substance of the comments in the conversation?
She thought it would be good for business.
Okay, thank you. Based on any of these disclosures, does anyone want to seek disqualification of council members based on the communications? And for the record, Mr. Danish, for the applicant, is shaking his head no. All right, to the second issue, it was raised by the commenter about alleging that members of the club at Snoqualmie Ridge received some sort of discount from Columbia Hospitality. Do any of the council members want to speak to that? I have no indication whether that's true or false.
It is true. If you go to the Salish and have lunch or dinner, you get a 20% discount. Because they are managed by the same company.
And so that's available to any member of the...
Any member, regardless of membership type, you get 20% off at the Salish Lodge because Columbia Hospitality is the management company that manages both properties.
Okay.
But I also think, doesn't Snoqualmie Ridge residents, I think they also get that
I believe
discount
they do.
now.
Yeah, the ROA, the ROA offers that as well.
Wow, we're all out of luck then. None of us can vote.
Councilmember Mayhew?
I'll need to recuse yourselves, Brad.
I was just going to mention that it's my understanding that that discount is given to any, that the Salish Lodge extends that to anyone living on Snoqualmie Ridge, regardless of their membership at the club at Snoqualmie Ridge. And it's my understanding that in practice, they will also honor it for anyone living anywhere in the city of Snoqualmie.
Okay. And based on, let me start that again. Does any council member believe that the existence of that discount impairs your ability to decide impartially on the applications that are in front of you with respect to the Salish?
No.
No.
Councilmember Ross?
No.
Councilmember
No.
Holloway? Councilmember Mayhew?
No.
Councilmember Lissay?
No.
Councilmember Sundwall?
No.
Councilmember Shepherd?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes my, or go ahead,
Well, I
Councilmember
was
Ross.
going to say, you also get the discount, so does that preclude you then? I mean,
Who also?
I don't know.
no, I mean, Councilmember Shepherd gets the discount as well, so. Anyway,
So you're not sure if it influences your decision, Councilmember Shiver?
I'm not a member of the club, so I'm not sure what we're talking about.
As a resident of Snoqualmie, you would be able to get a 20% discount at the Salish Lodge. Just the fact that
No,
discount is
not as a
available to you-
resident, no.
Yeah, would it influence your potential decision to be impartial in this decision?
No.
Thank you. That concludes my questions on this aspect with respect to the appearance of fairness. And then, Mayor, my question from a procedural standpoint, do we want to have the executive session, closed session conversation related to the Salish now or at the
I think
tail end?
I'm inclined to do it more at the tail end. Like I said, we'll check in at
Okay.
8:30-ish, only because, we might lose members of the public that might want to observe most of the conversation. And could be taking some long 20-minute pause and coming back again. So with that, we'll jump in. Frankly, I didn't know about the 20% discount, so thanks for mentioning that. And I'm not a decision-making here either, so I was a little concerned for a while the whole council would have to recuse itself, then we'd have a real dilemma. So,
Well, and Mayor, just for the record and for members of the public who might wonder about that, there is, the appearance of fairness doctrine includes something called the doctrine of necessity, which says that if more than a quorum of the decision-making body would need to recuse itself for any reason, then all of the members can then participate without respect to any potential conflict. It recognizes that you're the body that has to decide this, and if you lost your ability to do that, that someone still needs to make the decision, and it would be this body.
I did not know that. I thought he was going to say the mayor gets to decide, but okay. Jason, go ahead, jump in.
All right, we left off with item number 12, affordable housing, and the gist of this is describe the affordable housing requirements for the site. And we've certainly had discussion about this before. It's a 15% requirement that applies to the residential component. The response specifically notes, since the managed residential units are part of the hotel entitlement and not the residential entitlement, that they are exempt from this, and we had discussion about that earlier this evening. As to some history of where did the 15% come from, we can trace it back to the Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2 development agreements, the Kimmel Creek Village development agreement. Beyond that, I don't know. The comprehensive plan certainly speaks to an affordable housing requirement. I don't know if it has a specific percentage in it, does it? And then the Planning Commission recommended a condition about an affordable housing plan, which is condition number 9 in the Planning Commission's findings, conclusions, and recommended conditions. This affordable housing plan would need to be approved by the council prior to approval of the preliminary plat for the residential component.
Sorry, could you say that last bit again?
So the Planning Commission is recommending a condition of approval that would require the development of an affordable housing plan for this project that would need to be approved by the City Council prior to preliminary plat approval. So the applicant couldn't get a subdivision approved without having the affordable housing plan in place. And that plan would need to meet the requirements of the development agreement, section, paragraph 2.2, and the other conditions that are in the condition of approval.
This was a recommendation by the Planning Commission?
By the Planning Commission.
Love
and
it.
so that's to address some of the issues we've seen with past projects about the units aren't dispersed throughout, for example, or they're built at the very tail end of the project. The Planning Commission had an extensive discussion about this issue and their concerns. It would also there's some other criteria that the Planning Commission recommended about this, let me find it here. The other big deal was a deed restriction, and they recommended a 30-year deed restriction.
can you clarify, I think I know what it means, but can you clarify what the deed restriction means in the context of the record?
Sure. What it means is that, so the home as initially built would have to be sold under the affordability rules, which are in the development agreement. Once it's sold the first time, those rules no longer apply. So somebody could turn around, sell it for a massive profit, essentially the next day. With a deed, now in practice it doesn't really work that way, but that has been an issue in the past. The deed restriction, the 30-year deed restriction, means that it needs to be affordable for a period of 30 years. And so those criteria will continue to apply going forward, so somebody couldn't just turn around and do that.
Councilman Sunwell.
So what's affordable now, I assume, will be different than in 5 years. So does that scale slide with whatever, like 5, 10, 15 years from now is what is deemed affordable? So whatever the formula states that point in time?
Yeah.
So it's not a fixed price, it's fixed to the formula that exists for 30 years, so that home remains affordable for 30 years.
Correct.
That's an 80% AMI, is it, Jason?
I love it.
It's 80% of the King County area median income for a family of
Adjusted
four,
median income.
which is $106,000 for this year or something like that. That's the AMI. So 80% of the affordability is how you do the calculation. Yes, it's that high. It's actually higher in Snoqualmie than it is in King County.
Also not surprising.
You're doing well.
Well, and also that the mortgage cannot consume more than 30% of their annual income.
There's a bunch of
Councilman Jeans.
There's a lot of different.
The Planning Commission made what seemed to be a reasonable recommendation that they weren't requiring this 15% to be physically in that acreage that's going to be residential. But I'm not sure whether that, I'm not sure what other options there are in the city. And I'm wondering whether, at least theoretically, that affordable housing could be built on the hotel portion of it. So someone clarify whether it does not mean that the hotel portion is an option, and tell me that there are other options within the city that can help meet this criteria.
So the city does not have any provisions that allow either, let me back up. The city does not have what's called a fee in lieu provision, which would allow the developer to pay an amount of money determined by a complex calculation that other cities have done, but that this city has not done. And then the city would take the money and partner with somebody or build it or build affordable housing themselves at another site. The Planning Commission recommended the council consider such an approach, but the city does not have such an approach at the moment. Certainly, the council could develop and approve an approach prior to this affordable housing plan coming back. Strictly speaking, I believe the applicant could attempt to meet the affordable housing requirement off-site, but they would have to purchase a site and then build it. That would be an extremely difficult thing to do because, of course, land is expensive, development is expensive, and so economies of scale generally are going to push you toward building it with whatever other development you're already doing on land you already own. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess I don't like the answer. I don't know whether it answers it or not.
The Planning Commission didn't like the answer very much either.
I mean, I'm wondering whether it causes the council to ultimately decide, do we take money or do we really push for affordable housing? And we need affordable housing. Everybody, we need affordable housing. We get these units up on the hill, that's a great boon, but it doesn't meet our needs.
Well, and the requirement as written would require that the affordable housing be built within the residential component of the project. That's the default base assumption. Anything beyond that is something the council could certainly consider, but like I said, the fee in lieu program, a fee in lieu program does not exist, and so that's not technically an option right now. The council could create a program and then the applicant could get into that. They have expressed at the Planning Commission they would like to do that, but that's something for the council to consider.
Council may want to consider if a great opportunity presents itself where you'd rather do that, but right now you're reserving the right to exercise those options. Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Mayhew and Sunwell.
So one of the things that I think is what we're doing now as far as affordable housing is we're clustering all our affordable housing in one spot. And I think that we should look at the opportunity for people to, or developers to buy used homes or homes that are in existence and convert them to affordable housing and somehow get that salted throughout our community instead of having it clustered in one spot.
That is certainly something the council could consider allowing, but the requirement as written does not allow that right now. The objective is to achieve more raw number of units citywide, on a citywide scale. And so that would be taking existing housing units and converting them from market rate to affordable, which is a net win for affordable, but arguably a net loss for overall city housing provision. There are trade-offs in that the council would need to consider as a policy
Just for the sake of time,
statement.
I'm going to be more precise. That's sort of outside the record. It's not really, and that's a whole affordable housing conversation that can happen after the fact and can certainly be visited in context, but it's not relevant to this issue.
Mayor, if I can, well, the condition as written allows the applicant to participate in, potentially in affordable housing solutions that the council may devise in the future. And so,
but you reserve the control of whether you want to.
So council, correct. So conceivably, the council could modify the condition language to include the specific type of option that Councilmember Shepherd was just describing, if that was something that you wanted, a door that you wanted to leave open as a mechanism by which the applicant could in the future meet its affordable housing obligation.
But my point is that would have to take place after this was resolved.
Yeah, no,
Right,
yeah.
right. But you could modify, there's a condition right now in the Planning Commission resolution that speaks to the applicant's ability to participate in those other alternatives should the council approve them. And I was just trying to make the point, if you wanted to expand that potential menu in the condition language now, the council could do that if it chose.
Councilor Mayhew and then Councilor Summel.
So just to try and clarify the point here, the matter that's in front of us right now, and assuming we do not include the condition that you just mentioned that the Planning Commission had suggested we look at regarding fee in lieu or other programs, assuming we don't include that, right? The proposal that's actually in front of us right now, am I correct in understanding that it would require the 15% to either be built on the site or purchased somewhere else in the city, or built somewhere else in the city?
It's, yes.
No.
The condition as written says, alternatively, the affordable housing plan may provide for construction of the required affordable housing on a site other than the project site, evidenced by a binding enforceable legal commitment approved by the city attorney for construction of such housing at such other site. So that's in the condition as recommended by the Planning Commission.
It's proposed.
Yeah, but assuming we do not take the Planning Commission's, that's something the Planning Commission suggested we consider. Right. If we decide not to consider that.
Are you saying, if number 9 went away, what is the condition? Right. What is required? If number 9 went away.
Yeah, what I'm saying is forgetting what the Planning Commission said we might increase options to be. If we just take what the applicant has submitted, they would have to build the 15% affordable housing units on the site.
Yes.
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 Yes, according to the development agreement.
So unless we do something else, they will have to, and so if we approve this, and unless we do something else, such as this condition or some other program or whatever.
Converting houses or whatever.
If we approve this, they have to build it on the site.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, and then my only other item, I just want to be clear, there's this condition from the Planning Commission about affording, they're recommending in number 9 the language that, quote, affordable housing shall be constructed contemporaneously with construction of other residences. It is not deferred until the final phase. But I just thought I heard you saying something to the effect that they also recommend that we require an affordable housing plan that gets approved by this council prior to final plat?
Preliminary plat.
Preliminary plat. And that would actually include, so I'm a little bit confused, seems like there's two different things, but maybe we only need one of those two things.
So what it's calling, so stepping back, the Development Agreement Act calls for the generation of an affordable housing plan. So the condition, and it says, shall be completed and approved as part of the PCI/PR plan review. The Planning Commission recommended condition would push that off a little bit further to, before they can build any homes whatsoever, the applicant needs to get an affordable housing plan approved by this council. That plan would then contain all the details about, are they going to be on site? Are we going to let them do it off site? What's the time? The contemporaneously language refers to the timing of when they're built. I mentioned we don't want them pushed off to the end. So the requirements are going hand in hand. The council could condition this and said to not require the affordable housing plan, simply say you need to build 15% on the site contemporaneously, period, done. And that would be the end of the story.
Right, but if we just require a housing plan, we can get to the same outcome.
Correct, at a later date.
Okay, so the question of, because I was worried that this contemporaneously wasn't sufficiently defined, but we'll get if we were to incorporate these two recommendations, these recommended conditions, then we'll see the housing plan before they get preliminary plat, so therefore we'll see it in time anyway.
Correct. And just to clarify for the council, the approval of a preliminary plat language means that they can't get their subdivision finalized, they can't build a single home until the affordable housing plan is complete.
And it's clear that has to go back through this council.
It says approval by the city council.
Great, thank you very much.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So I have two fundamental requirements in my mind of what affordable housing should look like on this particular parcel. In part, well, I won't go there, but explain to me what this statement means. Due to the smaller size of the residential component, 150 units, the Planning Commission opted against the requirement to disperse affordable housing within the residential component.
So in the case of Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2, those are very large developments, and one of the objectives in the affordable housing plans for those developments is to, instead of having them concentrated, as Councilmember Shepherd referred to, was to disperse the affordable housing throughout these large developments. That didn't happen, and the Planning Commission's concern is that we really want, or it can be desirable to have that dispersion throughout so that you're not having a single large development and they're more integrated in the community is how the theory goes. The Planning Commission's discussion was because this is a small, relatively speaking, development, it's 150 homes maximum, dispersal doesn't really do anything. I mean, you're talking about, it's a 30-acre site. So dispersal means you're going to have one here and, 5 here and things like that. So they opted against requiring that here.
So I will conclude my comments with my initial thought is that we should require that because I have two fundamental beliefs around affordable housing. First of all, they should not be an afterthought and should not be done last, which I do believe is addressed in this. And second of all, they shouldn't be put on an island. I do believe they need to be integrated within the neighborhood that they're in, definitely not off-site. I'm sort of tired of putting affordable housing out on an island. And that has been our MO in SR1, SR2, and I know this is a smaller settlement or smaller development, but I don't want to see us perpetrate that. I just don't. So if we need to have a, whatever you call it, to have that done, but I would probably support a, what are these called? Condition that would require that.
Councilmember Lissay and then Councilmember Ross.
I think Councilmember Shepherd had her hand up as well.
Oh, yeah, she was.
I'm seeing whose hands are going up,
Hey,
so
no.
I'll handle it. Councilmember Lissay and Councilmember Ross, and then Councilmember Shepherd.
I'm going to give the city attorney an opportunity to cut me off because I have a lot of knowledge in this topic and I do not want to enter any additional information into the record. With that being said, I support what the other council members have mentioned, that affordable housing is best done within a project, integrated, dispersed and at the time of the development. Without citing examples, the fee in lieu program is dangerous. I think it's a first step towards creating a program in Snoqualmie that pushes even further affordable housing away from the need at the time at which the housing is built. I would encourage this council to eliminate everything that follows after the alternatively in this condition, and to just remove that completely and have the applicant provide the affordable housing as the code requires, as their development is then also requires, and do it at the time they build the housing.
Councilmember Ross, Shepherd, and then Holloway.
I agree with Councilmember Lissay. It looks like we'll have a chance to further discuss this, but one thing I just want to make sure is that we can include the deed restriction. Is that correct? To have a minimum 30-year?
It's in the recommended condition from the Planning Commission, so certainly, yes, you absolutely could.
So we can do that?
Yes.
Okay. I see it's there, but I want to make sure we can do that.
Councilmember Shepherd, then Holloway.
So I understand that we don't have affordable housing for SR1 and SR2 because we kind of kicked the can down the road and we couldn't enforce affordable housing.
Actually, we've done better on affordable housing than any community on the east side, by far.
But at the time they were built, it didn't happen for SR1 and SR2.
Of course it did.
Not an argument material to the question at the committee.
Well, the question is, are we going to be able to enforce affordable housing? That's my question.
Yes, we have and we will. Councilmember Holloway.
So, guys, I would like to close the item with proposing that we accept the condition as written with the caveat that everything after alternatively the affordable housing plan may provide be stricken from the condition and accept the rest of the condition as written. We may require pink flamingos in the future, and I don't want to even propose what the future is in these conditions. Can I have a second, or do you guys still want to?
Second.
Are you making that
Does
as
that make a
form?
second?
Did you make a motion?
I would like to make a motion that we close this action with accepting the motion as written, the condition as written by the Planning Commission, except that we strike out everything from alternately the affordable housing plan may provide.
All right, did you want to
Point
make
of order?
Did you want to make a motion then?
I thought I just did.
You said I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I move to
accept the Planning Commission motion as written, with the exception that everything from alternately the affordable housing plan may provide is stricken.
Second.
Point of order.
Go ahead.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So we can close off debate on individual portions of this, not on the agenda bill as a whole?
He made a motion, in his motion, he did not address closing the issue. I know where you're going with this. All he addressed was everything else after alternative.
I was assuming during the discussion of his motion, you could make your points about, hey, I got some other ideas before you guys go wrapping this up in a bow.
I might have misunderstood. Could we have a restatement of the motion?
Oh, yeah.
Separate closure of the debate from the motion.
So this particular item of affordable housing, we have a requirement in the restated development agreement of 15%. And that's defined, and we've also said, so they're in compliance with that with their proposal. So I'm suggesting on top of their proposal, the condition as stated forward by the Planning Commission is applied, number 9, except for alternatively the affordable housing. And I believe that, to tell you the truth, guys, I believe that closes the conversation on affordable housing for this development. Except that they have to come with a plan to the council. Go ahead, Matt. Or,
All right. And a motion is second on the table, so I guess we have further discussion. So Councilmember Mayhew.
I most certainly do not agree that the topic of affordable housing is anywhere near close to being ready to be closed. I don't understand why I can't bring up other items such as 50-year covenant instead of 30 and ask questions around that. I think there's questions about how 15% has been calculated. I don't believe we're anywhere near appropriately cutting this off.
Councilmember Jeans and Councilmember Sumwell.
I agree with Councilmember Mayhew because I'm not sure whether this has been addressed as to whether after affordable housing units are built, what is the criteria for allowing people who qualify to go into it? I mean, it would be disturbing to me if the proponents of this said, oh, by the way, we're going to make this available to employees of the hotel, and that's the only people who can get into affordable housing. So I'd like someone to address the matter of allocating who will live there in a way that is fair for everybody in Snoqualmie, people who live here as well as people who work here.
Councilmember Sunwell.
Yeah, so maybe you can address how that's administered. I don't think the city has any involvement in administering that. My understanding is it's governed by the state or county in terms of who can apply and who can't. If I'm wrong on that, please correct me. What I was trying to ask you to do, Councilmember Holloway, is I think you might have broad support for removing the everything after alternatively, but let's not restrict the debate. And I think if you'll, the motion I seconded was simply that we would scratch everything after alternatively, and then you, if we just leave it at that, I think that doesn't necessarily close the debate. It might in your mind, but it may not in others. And so I think there might be broad support for your motion, save there might be some additional things like 30 versus 50 that we still want to discuss.
So I'm willing to modify the motion to just strictly take condition number 9 and strike the sentences as stated.
And I second that.
All right.
All right, any further discussion on the motion? Councilmember Say.
I think I support the motion to remove the text. I think, and I agree with the council members that there's still some more discussion to be made. I think what's important to note here is that we're not removing from this condition is that there must be an affordable housing plan. It must be presented to council and get council approval. I think there's still debate that needs to happen around a minimum 30-year period through deed restrictions and other provisions acceptable to the city. I don't know what that really means. How do we determine what's acceptable to the city? Is that a part of the affordable housing plan, or is that something separate? And so I'd like some clarification on that to know where that goes. And I also think that the 30-year period could be a topic of discussion as well. So I would just say that I support that we remove that language that gives the alternatives, but we still have issues to talk about. Okay. So.
Oh, yeah, I want to have an opportunity for the applicant to respond.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just ask, just on that, I think it would be helpful. Taking that wording out doesn't preclude if this council in the future makes some other arrangements available. Taking those wording out does not preclude them from participating in that. It just removes it as an explicit declaration at this time. Is that correct?
I don't think it.
Well, I think the development agreement as currently written and combined with if you take this language out would indicate that they are building it on site as part of their project and not taking advantage of things that the council might do in the future. But, so I think it would preclude them. However, the council has full control over what the form of its decision looks like, and so whatever motions are made tonight doesn't mean that you might not come back as you adopt this and tweak these condition language further.
In other words, point of clarification though. If in 2 weeks we come back and we pass an ordinance of fee in lieu of, this action would not prevent them from participating in that.
Correct.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say there's nothing that precludes them from engaging the mayor and the administration in some negotiation about some other creative solution that's just way out of the box, and maybe it's something that pays 1.5 times the typical fee in lieu or whatever else, and then we bring it to the council for their consideration. You go, wow, we didn't think of that, but that looks great to us.
I'm just taking out because I don't need to discuss pink flamingos till I discuss pink flamingos.
Right.
Sorry, I don't want to jump in, but the affordable housing plan, once presented to the council, may have recommendations that are more appropriate than this narrowly worded items. I'd rather leave it open for a presentation from the applicant to say, hey, we'd like to do it this way. The council may not accept that, but these are only 2 ways of providing affordable housing outside of the condition that they need to provide for affordable housing. I support that we stick to the condition that they provide affordable housing, let them prepare an affordable housing plan, and let us discuss it at that time.
Rachel, go ahead.
I actually agree with Councilmember Lassay, but I come from the other side of it, which is we would prefer to have the language in there only because if we come back at a later time and say, here's a better idea, or here is a new idea, we like the idea that this has been addressed to some extent. We could have a different council when we're doing that. Things could change. It's good to have it in writing that we've all discussed this and are looking towards it. Our interest in this language is solely for the purpose of having flexibility. We're not saying we're going to do fee in lieu. We don't know that that's something we would do or build things off-site. We're looking at making sure flexibility is something that should be considered. And part of that is really to try and make that affordable housing as useful of an outcome to this city as possible. We're concerned about, with the level of development that we're putting in up there, the design elements. They're potentially going to be homeowner dues that, well, they will affect the affordability of the housing. Our concern is the dollars spent to provide the same number of units somewhere else could allow for more units, lower prices, and meeting the needs of affordability better. We don't know that's the case because we haven't gotten far enough. Again, it's just a matter of flexibility, and that's all we're asking for. So we would actually prefer, even if you put in language that said, and other options we haven't even thought of yet, kind of language, just let's put a footnote in this that the council looked at this and said, we're open to ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Councilmember Holloway.
So I respectfully disagree. We are being asked to adjudicate that the development proposal agrees with code and with the development agreement. Those things mentioned in the sentences we're talking about do not exist in any of those. So I will fault on we're introducing stuff not in the record, and it does not preclude participation in the future. I hear you saying it helps in the conversation, but that's not, I'm not being asked to adjudicate that. I'm asking, does it comply? Okay? So I, again, respectfully disagree, and I think it ought to be stricken. That doesn't preclude future actions.
Councilmember Holloway, I would just offer, I'm not sure that, I think you're Rachel perhaps saying that keep the Plan Commission language on there. I think I hear you guys saying the same thing. I mean, you're saying just narrow the focus on language that strictly speaks to what our current requirements and rules are.
Right.
But you're also saying, but it doesn't preclude administration.
Whatever in the future.
Bring back whatever kind of creative things that you want to explore that Rachel just described. That's still on the table. So I think you guys are saying the same thing. It's just, it's a matter of kind of what language in there. Whether you keep that Planning Commission language there or not doesn't necessarily restrict exploring other creative options that the council might find far more attractive. Councilmember Sunwell.
So we really need to move on this. Yeah. But what I will say is this council will forever be on the hook for how we vote in a few weeks, right? And regardless of whether future councils come about, I believe, my sense is that a majority of this council has very explicit ideas of what this housing should look like. And that's why I'm in favor of striking that language. It does not preclude any future council or this council, based on the affordable housing plan that they're going to put together, to adopt anything, 20-story lofts, if that seemed like a really good idea, right? As long as they're below 35 feet. But I think we send a message by taking out that language of what the intent of this council is at this moment in time. And so I would move that we just take a vote, and if it passes, great, we move on. If not, whatever.
Is that a call to question?
Yes.
Let's call the question.
All right. Question has been called. Again, that requires a supermajority to call the question. All those in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Didn't hear any opposition, so.
No.
Okay, one nay. All right, motion is passed. So all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
No.
Okay, 2 noes and I believe 5 ayes. All right, so the motion is passed. The language has been sort of truncated or reduced, simplified. I hope very clear to you, Jason, in terms of what the supplicant, what's been deleted.
Yeah, I've got what they deleted.
Right. Excellent, all right. Councilmember Mayhew and then Sunwell.
I just wanted to double back to this. There was some discussion about the 30-year deed restriction, and I just wanted to, I'm just making sure I don't make comments that are introducing new information. Let me just ask, is it an option for us to require, instead of a 30-year deed restriction, a 50-year?
Let's add that to our list.
Discussion later? Okay,
Yeah,
thank
correct.
you.
Thank you.
So I would propose that we move on from this topic, given the context of what it is we're trying to decide on affordable housing, and given that we will address the deed term in a closed or executive session. I feel like in the context of what we're asked to decide on affordable housing tonight, given there will still be an affordable housing plan that comes forward, that we move on to the next topic.
Okay, the only question I had in my mind that wasn't clear to me, you raised this issue of dispersion versus consolidation.
Again, I believe we'll have an opportunity to see a plan.
Okay, you leave that for the
And
plan.
we can throw darts at it then.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure you didn't feel that that was not considered.
Oh, I'll remember.
All right. Okay, if we'll see no objections to that, we are going to move on. All right, there's no objections. And we'll just discuss that one item about the 30 versus 50-year in executive session.
Bob, you have that written down as a note to discuss? Okay.
Jason, go
All
ahead.
right, so the next one, future development. What future development may affect the project? Specifically, a portion of the parcel immediately north of the Salish parcels actually, is within the urban growth area. It is not annexed into the city, so it's not within city limits. It's owned by Weyerhaeuser. That's the only information we have. They've never approached us about development or annexation or anything.
Right, I was curious about the size of it. Because you have the UGA, then we have city services and utilities are scalable to current and planned future expansions. So you would have already known what that size would be.
I don't recall off the top of my head, it's not large. It's certainly not another 30 acres.
Okay, so it's
like 10-ish, I'll say.
Councilor Sunwell?
Is that the site where they fairly recently, within last year, did a bunch of clear cutting? There was some, just north of the Tokel Trail?
No, this parcel is actually south of the Tokel. So it's essentially the property between the north end of the Salish and the trail.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
So between the two properties is about 10 acres, or is it 10 and 10?
Yeah, it's roughly 10 acres within the UGA that's not annexed.
Total, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May not even be that much.
Any other questions on this item, council? All right, see no objection, we'll consider this item closed and move on.
Okay, the site location. So there's a question about, describe the site involved. And so the application materials are very clear about what the site is. And we lay out some history of the legal description of the site through time. As previously noted, the amended and restated development agreement is the one in force here. And so certainly I would say staff does not have any concern about what the site is for this project.
Any further concerns or questions about this, council? Councilmember Shepherd?
So what is frustrating for me is I don't see much in the way of maps and identifying what the legal description is describing. And it would be really helpful if we could have more maps that described it for each of the original development agreement and each of the amendments.
The application materials have a map in them. There are no other maps that I'm aware of. Certainly they're not part of the record if there are.
Yeah, I'm not clear what you're asking for, Councilmember Shepherd.
Well, it's just based on one of the amendments, it changed what was considered the Morgan property and what was considered the Tokel property, and it seemed like there was some misunderstanding in the original development agreement about what was what. And so it's just a real lack of, there's not specific parcel numbers that we can go to look this up, or There's no maps provided that you can really identify it. And we've got some real incomplete documentation as far as the record.
Unfortunately, I've offered what's in the record, and I don't see a question I can answer here.
Yeah, Rachel, do you recall any confusion about the parcels that were involved in this project for the last 13, 14? So I'm not sure what we would produce, because I have no idea what.
I think what Council Member Shepherd may be referring to is, I believe the First Amendment corrected a legal description to one, or the second, thank you.
More of a typo or error.
Legal description to one of the parcels. But as Mr. Rogers was saying, what's in front of the council right now is the amended and restated agreement and the application. So whatever might have changed or didn't change is between the different iterations of the development agreement is not material to the council's consideration now of applying the legal criteria of the code to the application that's in front of you.
Any other questions or concerns about this item, council? All right. Hearing no other further objections, we'll consider this item closed and move on.
All right. Number 15, residential deviations. And so the question is, are the requested residential design standards consistent with the code? There's some fairly lengthy discussion in the Planning Commission issue matrix about this, and also multiple conclusions and some conditions. The short answer is that the code, the planned residential code, specifically allows for deviations. The council needs to approve the deviations, so they're not an automatic. Through the course of this, the applicant and staff and Planning Commission identified a number of both specifically requested and potential deviations from the code requirements that would allow the project to be built as envisioned. One of those, for example, is the height of the hotel component. The height limit in the PCI zone is 40 feet. The hotel would be 55 feet, and the development agreement would allow it to be as tall as 85 feet.
75.
I'm sorry?
75.
Oh, 75, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I had number 85 in my head for some reason. So that's certainly a deviation that the council will need to address to make this project buildable as shown in the application at all. As far as the residential standards, there's a number of deviations that are requested to enable the applicant to build the residential component as envisioned. Now, that's a fairly high-level vision right now, and that's where the residential design standards come in, because it gives the council an opportunity at a later date, once the applicant has had an opportunity to engage a development partner for the residential component, and come to some clarity themselves on what do they want it to look like, and you also let the council think more, what does the council want to look like, to work through those standards at a later date. Because right now you see in the application, there's simply a giant blob on the map. This is the residential component. There's nothing in there about what the homes might look like exactly. There is some information in the record that was provided to the Planning Commission about the general look and feel and street standards. So you can certainly look at that information, but you are going to get another crack at this with the residential standards.
Councilmember Lucie and then Sunwell.
I have to admit, I brought this up originally because I was concerned that there were a number of deviations in the conclusions and not the findings of fact, but the conclusions and then there were some additional deviations in the conditions. It has been some time since we talked about it, so I need to refresh my memory on that. But what I'd like to have from staff and continue the discussion talk now, but also continue at a later date once you've been able to get the information, is what are those conditions or I guess what are those deviations that are currently entrenched either in the conditions or the conclusions, so we can pull them out so we understand what they are. We can address that those are the conditions and those are deviations that we're considering, and I understand that we can come back to it later, we can address it later, but it'd be good to have those daylit now, because I think they're kind of buried. Okay. Not on purpose, but they're in there. They're just hard to find.
Yeah, the response to the question in the issue matrix I do point to the Planning Commission matrix, the finding, conclusions, and the conditions, so that's a good start, but we can pull something out and better identify that. So you're not hunting through this and another matrix and the development agreement, the code and everything else.
Yeah, it goes to the,
Yeah.
some of it goes to the stormwater standard, that the road construction is a deviation. There's some deviations in the parcel sizes, there's some deviations in the lot sizes, the parcel percentages, the lot sizes, and some others. I don't want to get into all of the items that I've been able to find, but it'd really be helpful if staff could zero in on those items.
Yep.
Councilmember Summerall.
This will be the first time I've been through something of this magnitude here. I'm just, is it normal to consider residential deviations at this point in the process? Because I feel like we get either at preliminary plat or some other form down the road to be able to determine that this is what things kind of need to look like. And it feels premature, and I don't even know, and maybe we need to talk about this elsewhere. I don't even know if is this, whether they can have this deviation or that deviation, is that something we would decide by the 31st? Or is that something that's sort of down the road, we're interested in now, but is sort of, you really don't even get to until down the road?
In this case, it's a combination of factors where the council would, if you will, conditionally approve the deviations now, but the condition is that they need residential standards at a later date. So you can always pull it back, so to speak, and say, so for example, one of the deviations that was identified by staff as being potential, not necessarily required, but potential, is to minimum lot size. They may not need it at the end of the day, but the idea now is to provide the potential flexibility should they need the deviation down the road, because we can't predict that right now until the council can have a chance to discuss the residential standards.
So these discussing the deviations at this point actually is more helpful to the developer so that they know whether or not they can move forward with this project.
It's helpful to both the city and the developer at this point.
Yeah.
And also so that they know, otherwise, without some of them, for example, on the road sections and whatnot, in order to submit a complete application for preliminary plat, they would need to design it meeting all of our current road standards without, so this gives them some idea of what target they're shooting for when they bring the preliminary plat application to the city.
Okay, thank you.
I think many of you are aware of the origin of that. I mean, I think that right now, we have well-defined, detailed residential plans, but I think all of us concluded after seeing the aesthetic and of what they're trying to achieve with the hotel site, that to take a Snoqualmie Ridge type neighborhood and plop it down next to that, there would be kind of an incongruency. And so trying to continue that wooded feel and more natural environment is what we're after here, and giving them more flexibility to achieve something not only that would be more successful for the project, but that we think would be more successful for our goals as well. So it's right now, it's just trying to allow some creative room in there. Councilor Mayhew.
So I'm not, in theory, opposed to this for the very reasons that you just touched on. What I'm troubled with is, with so little information available about the residential development at this point, and I'm worried that I don't fully understand the ramifications of, I think you used the term conditional approval. And so what I'm worried about is agreeing to anything when we have so little to base that on. Now, but the comment, well, we have a pretty good sense of what the hotel site will look like. And yeah, I get the point that you just made, Mayor. But how to translate that into some agreement that this can happen and that cannot, or I'm just very, I would feel like you need a lot more education on what are the ramifications. Obviously, if we're being asked to do something, which means it's something more than nothing, and I just don't feel I understand all the ramifications or why that would be appropriate at this time. So maybe not necessarily now, or if you want to now, but I'd want to just understand that a lot better before I could form a view on it.
Okay. I can give a brief answer now, which is that if the council, if you don't approve them or make any decision on the deviations now and then approve the master plan, you would effectively be denying the deviations, and so they could not come back and then ask for them later. So it's a combination of timing and practicality, because the applicant simply is not in a position to answer the questions you may have now. because they don't have a development partner, they haven't thought through the residential component to a sufficient degree yet to have those answers. And so we're buying time for that to occur. Otherwise, you're either holding up the entire master plan approval, waiting for that, or they're stuck with meeting the letter of the code, which would, as the mayor said, take what is essentially a Snoqualmie Ridge-style subdivision and plop it down there, which may not be what the applicant and the city desires there.
Okay, so can I just do a follow-up question then?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm understanding this better then. So if we do the thing that's being requested, conditional approval, does that mean that staff then makes some further, in other words, are there decisions that currently would need to be made by council that after giving this a conditional approval would now be made by staff instead?
At this stage, no. The applicant would need to come back with proposed residential development design standards for the council to approve. If the council approves them, then staff would go off and implement them as the individual house building permits came in. But the next approval is very firmly in the council's lap.
But it would be a different set of customized standards that would be more fitting to that site and the aesthetic that I described.
So what we'd be doing is saying, yes, we agree in principle that something different, we would consider something different, and then we wait to see what that would be before we'd actually approve it.
Exactly.
And does the city lose any, if in the end, council was saying, nope, you have to do exactly what the ridge calls for, would we have lost the ability to say that?
To say what? I'm sorry.
To follow the letter of the code.
If they're new creative.
Nope, you have to do exactly what you had to do on the, what the city code says.
So they come back with a new creative approach and
would we
everybody
still be
decides.
able to say that?
Everybody decides it's awful. Can they just say, you know what, just go back to plop a ridge?
No deviations.
I'm not sure which is the question, but if you, at the end of the day, if you adopt residential design standards for the residential portion of this project that are identical to the ridge, then yes, council can do that. And yes, that would have the effect of essentially pulling back some of the deviations that are talked about.
Okay, so the only reason I asked that is just to fully understand what we're doing, not because I anticipate that that would happen. So all we're doing is signaling that, yeah, we understand and are approving that they would come forward with some modified design that was appropriate, and we'd consider it when they do so.
Not just that, but the SMC requires that all future deviations be listed in the application materials and the master plan action.
And that has to come before the council for approval.
And as part of this action,
That's
absolutely.
what's in front of you right now is the master plan approval.
So they had to include them.
Had to
in this
include them if they
application
want them
written
now.
in
It's a speak now or forever hold
Oh,
the
and so
peace.
this is sort of getting an in-between solution where they don't have them now, we're giving them some guidance for later, and then letting them bring them forward later. Okay, got it.
Correct.
Thank you.
So, point of order. So we're at 8:30, and that's where we agreed to check in and see if we still wanted to keep going. So I'm just.
Okay, thank you.
Any movements?
Yeah, no movement?
But I think we might be able, I have a sense that we might be about to close out on item 15.
I think Bob might have had one comment.
Bob, you want to add real quick? We'll try in the next 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to wrap up, and then.
Let's say we reach agreement with the applicant and the city regarding design standards for the residential component. I'm not sure the record reflects, and I'm not sure how I feel about, let's say the next day, the applicant sells the rights to the residential to Star Wars Development Company. And the idea is we've grown comfortable and accustomed to the fact that they're going to build a hotel and there's going to be consistency and so forth with respect into the residential unit. I'm concerned that it seems to me they ought to have the option to sell that, and yet I'm concerned about if they do that, whether we're going to lose the consistency that we want, the quality that we want, if they have the option, and are we behind the 8 ball at that point?
All right, so that goes back to Councilmember Mayhew's question, and I guess I'll rephrase that question of the city attorney. The Star Wars development buys the residential component from them and then comes in with a deviation, exploring something different and creative that has every home looking like the Millennium Falcon or some variation of a spaceship.
Two houses.
And everybody says, this is not what we were thinking, this is horrible. Have has the council given up its ability to say, we're going to revert to a Snoqualmie Ridge standard, just do it as a?
No, they've not given that up.
That's the
They
point.
can still.
So I'm thinking
The control over the residential design standards is still in the council's.
That was the heart, I think, of Councilmember Mayhew's question. So we're trying to just provide a mechanism where they can come up with something that would be, again, far more satisfying for our goals as well as theirs. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Jeans?
They have the option of selling it, right?
They do.
Yes.
Sure.
But I think they've already stated they are not going to build a single house.
Okay.
Because that's not what they do.
Okay.
So you can expect XYZ company, or
Okay.
maybe Star Wars development, that would be fantastic. X-Wing fighter home, come on.
It might also be eligible for lodging tax funding for a tourism-related facility.
That's true.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right. It sounds like, if there's no objections, we consider this item closed. I
No.
think everybody's gotten comfortable with it?
No.
Moving on.
Moving on from, because I think we still need a list of those deviations to understand what they are asking for right now. If we can just come back to that one in the future, keep going through the rest of the numbers, but have at the next meeting, if you could.
So do you understand what kind of specificity?
I'm having trouble finding all the deviations that are actually
Councilmember
asked for
Lissay is
now.
asking for a list of all the requested
As long as you're
deviations,
clear
so-
about what you're asking, you're going, I know how to do that, I can get that back
A
to you.
standalone index, essentially, to the
Okay.
deviations.
Yes, exactly, just so we can see,
Closest thing we have is suggested condition number 8.
right, but it
we can
doesn't.
prepare
it doesn't-
something
Great,
more
great. So we know we're going to bring back 8 or prepare some other lists. Okay, good.
Awesome.
Is that the only remaining item on this, or between now and closure on this item? Jim, your questions were satisfied on that too? Okay. Councilmember Ross?
So I can't find the information right now, but I know that the development agreement expires probably before the residential homes are to be built. So what happens there?
Sorry, he was looking up his Ewok house he was going to build out there?
That's
Milestones and expiration of the development agreement.
right. I'm not sure why. The assumption is that it'll expire before.
I'll find it. There was a date that it terminates, and so is it going to?
Correct, but
Right.
the milestones in the amended and restated development agreement don't include a specific deadline for the residential because the city's interest at that time, as expressed by the mayor and council, was primarily in the hotel and associated facilities, and that if the applicant wanted to do the residential first, that was okay, as long as they hit those specified milestones for the hotel and associated facilities. And conversely, if they wanted to bring forward the BSIP for the hotel first and go ahead and the residential would follow, that's fine, so long as everything was done by the last deadline specified. If they need more time, they will have to come and ask the city council for an extension of the milestones. But right now, the agreement was predicated on everything being done by the final date.
But if the development agreement expires,
Right.
they lose their right to do the building as outlined in the development agreement. So we'd have to go into another whole cycle of a development agreement.
If they want to ask for an amendment, correct. I mean, not necessarily the entire thing, but.
I'm just saying, if it expires,
It's like 2023
we're back to
or
square
something.
one.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to it.
That's pretty soon.
Second, paragraph 9, page 22.
Still won't have our interchange done by then.
Sign that.
Keep your movements to yourself. But again, legally, Bob, if the development agreement expires, development privileges expire with it. In order to reenact development privileges, we would have to go into another development agreement.
Correct. I mean,
Not that I see it happening.
generally stated, yes.
2022 is pretty soon.
So, but to answer your question, they can't develop without a development agreement.
Right. So they'd have to extend it or something.
We'd extend it or write into it.
21 is yours.
I mean, so, I mean, there are lots of hypotheticals, but let's say the council were to approve this master plan in some form, and they go ahead and they achieve a binding site improvement plan that carves off the hotel portion. That's approved, they begin building it, they sell the residential, and then the development agreement were later to expire. The property owner holding that remaining residential portion could always come to the city and seek to develop it under the existing plat improvement, or plat requirements in the city code. They just wouldn't have the deviations and the other aspects of, that you're discussing right now that pertain to the residential portion. So it would depend on the sequence and timing of events.
Councilmember Mayhew.
I'm just, so, never mind. I don't, the city attorney answered, yeah, what he said.
All right. On that note, let's conclude this conversation for now. We'll pick up the Salish later. We're going to actually continue some of the Salish conversation in executive session. You guys, obviously, oh, Terry, do you want to add something before you guys?
No, may I ask the council and or the mayor a question? Is it likely, based on timing, that you're going to resume discussion of the issue matrix after you come back from your executive session, or may we be excused?
No, it's asking if he can go home.
You can be excused. No, we're not, because we're going to have another executive session on an entirely different item at the tail end of this one, so it'll come out more likely adjourned. So, good, great question. Thanks for clarifying.
Right.
Enjoy the rest of your long evening.
Time for a bio break. And before starting.
All right.
Dinner.
So with that, we're going to go into executive session. Oh, hang on a sec. Let me get my notes. We're going to go into a closed session pursuant to RCW 42.30.140, Section 2, and/or executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, Section 1, little I, little triple I. And we also have an executive session regarding potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, Section 1, little I, triple I. With that, everyone else is able to, or invited to head home and enjoy the rest of your evening. Oh, in the executive session, and actually for the minutes and the record, for the one that we had at 5 p.m., Jason Rogers, Mark Hoffman, and Bob Sturbank were to be included in that executive session. They will also be part of this executive session along with who else? And Dan Marcinko. Everyone else gets to go home, including.
See how long it's going to be?
The executive session will probably last approximately half hour, 30 minutes executive session total. Yeah, probably 45 minutes. Let's put 45 minutes.
They're all a part of, there's a more global federation of tribes.